Within the world of a game, the hero Evan stands defiant before his nemesis. He raises his sword and shield, shouting the villain's name, Zeke, and vowing that he is the one person he can never forgive. The scene pulls back to reveal a young man in his room, playing on a handheld console. He scoffs at the hero's passionate plea, dismissing the need for forgiveness. From the villain's perspective, he declares that they will all be slaughtered right there, a sentiment mirrored by the cold gaze of the character Zeke on his screen. He finds the hero's predictable righteousness as infuriating as ever, a familiar annoyance in his long-played game. Lying on his bed, a determined grin spreads across his face. With renewed focus, he decides it's time to end this final battle once and for all. His thumb presses down decisively on the console's button. On the screen, the villain Zeke is struck by a powerful blow, crying out as he is thrown backward. He leaps to his feet in triumph, celebrating his victory and the completion of every possible ending in the game. But his celebration is cut short by a sudden, sharp sensation, and he collapses, his body hitting the floor with a thud. His consciousness fades to black, replaced by the words "now loading." Slowly, an unfamiliar, opulent room begins to materialize before his disoriented mind. His eyes snap open. His gaze is fixed on a plate of food being cut by a fork and knife held in what he realizes are his own small hands. Confusion floods his thoughts as he wonders where he is. His internal questioning is interrupted by a man's voice from across a grand dining table. The man, who appears to be his father, asks why he is zoning out, while a woman seated beside him looks on with concern. He felt a strange sense of familiarity as he looked at the man and woman before him. His new mother stated that he was now 12 years old and could no longer act like a child. His father added a stern warning, questioning if he didn't constantly tell him that time was something gold could not buy back. Their voices seemed to echo as he stared into the polished surface of a glass, seeing a stranger's face reflected back. A voice called out his new name, Zeke. The name jolted him. He clutched his head as the truth crashed down upon him. He wasn't just in some random body. He was the villain from the game he had just been playing. He had actually become Zeke. His mind raced, recalling the details of that game. It was Wish Soul, a widely popular RPG celebrated for its incredibly deep story and satisfying combat. The game was filled with charming, personality-packed characters, not just the main hero. But among all those beloved characters, one stood out for his rock-bottom reputation. The final boss and embodiment of evil, Zeke. The character's history was a litany of atrocities. He had attacked the protagonist's family, kidnapped the heroine, twisted the Night Order into his personal army, and even obliterated an entire town. The list of his villainous acts was seemingly endless. The full weight of his new identity settled upon him with crushing force. He was now that monster, a cruel and irredeemable fiend. The shock sent him stumbling backward, knocking over his ornate chair with a clatter. He caught himself, realizing with a start that this was a reincarnation. Flexing his hand, he felt a wave of relief. He could control this new body just fine. Just then, a maid opened the door, starting to ask if he was okay. Before she could finish, he whirled on her, his face a mask of fury. "What are you dilly-dallying for?" he yelled. His outburst stunned the two maids in the doorway. From his position on the floor, he barked an order, his voice filled with an unearned authority. "Clean that mess up now." The maids could only stare, bewildered. He reeled internally, horrified. He had meant to apologize, but the words that escaped were a vicious insult, roaring at the maids not to dare embarrass their master. His outburst left the maids trembling in shock. He recognized the cruel attitude instantly. It was exactly like the villain Zeke. This, he realized, meant this world was undeniably real. With a grimace, he crossed his arms, the terrible truth settling in. Any words or actions that didn't fit the character of Zeke were being forcibly corrected by the world itself. He turned and stared at his reflection in a nearby mirror, the face of a stranger confirming his new reality. There was no mistaking it. He was Zeke. He had tried to resist this compulsion before, but every time, he was forced to act like the villain against his will. This very moment was just the latest proof. It seemed the world itself was forcing him down a predetermined path, compelling him to follow the exact life of Zeke. This meant that no matter which story route from the game he might take, he would always encounter the protagonist and inevitably meet his end at the hero's hands. If things continued this way, he was fated to be killed by the hero. But he stopped himself. A new thought cut through the despair. In the game, Zeke eventually becomes strong enough to be the final boss. His eyes widened. If that was true, then there was a chance he could actually beat the protagonist. He smirks with confidence, believing he just needed a bit of practice. Nearby, a chicken clucks, seemingly unimpressed. The boy is immediately proven wrong, finding himself flat on his back, utterly defeated by a small flock of chickens. His practice sword lies discarded in the grass as he laments how pathetic he is, grateful that no one was around to witness the humiliation. While he recovers, two maids sweeping a nearby hall discuss their young master's sudden desire to learn swordsmanship, one of them remarking on the inscrutable whims of the nobility. Unseen, Zeke realizes that physically swinging his limbs is entirely different from simply pushing buttons. Acknowledging his own incompetence, he sits at his desk and pores over a list of potential instructors. His eyes widen as he finds the best candidate among them, a man named Hartmann. He studies the man's file, noting his history as a former Night Order Regiment commander. Zeke dismisses all other options as trash, convinced that if he is to survive his fated encounter with the protagonist, he needs the absolute best. His resolve hardens. He knows he has no choice but to become stronger to survive. To do that, he must receive training from his ex-knight, Blink, right here at the Lagia's estate. Soon after, in a grand hall, Hartmann is summoned before Zeke and his father. Lord Lagias introduces the man, who places a hand over his heart and announces his arrival. Zeke permits him to raise his head and speak directly. Blink begins by stating that the request to serve as Lord Zeke's personal instructor is a most gratifying offer. However, he continues, there are circumstances that prevent him from accepting. Zeke is visibly taken aback by the refusal. With a somber expression, he elaborates on his reasons. About a year ago, his son fell gravely ill. He has since dedicated himself entirely to the boy's care, but his recovery has been painfully slow. As he listens, Zeke understands. Blink explains that his wish for more time with his son is precisely why he left the Night Order and returned from the royal capital. This is the reason the formidable warrior is available, yet unable to accept the position. He listened as Hartmann continued, the man's voice tight with anguish. The position offered had seemed like a blessing, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, terrible turn. His son's condition had drastically worsened. He processed the swordsman's pained words, a single, pragmatic question forming in his mind. Was this truly a problem that money could not solve? Later, in his study, Zeke received a more detailed report from his father. Lord Lagias explained that they had consulted numerous physicians for Blink's son, but the boy only grew weaker with each passing day. The pain had become so severe that he was now completely immobile. His father knelt, awaiting instruction. With an authority that belied his age, Zeke gave a simple command, ordering him to speak and provide every last detail. Lord Lagias complied, recounting the history of the illness. For about a year, the boy had been confined to his bed, but he was at least still able to converse and eat without issue. But that changed just a few days ago. The boy's health had deteriorated rapidly, reaching a point where he could no longer keep anything down. Now, even the simple act of breathing was an agonizing struggle for him. As he absorbed the grim details, the solution struck him with the clarity of a memory from his past life. He knew the cure. For the antidote, they needed the venom gland of a basilisk. His declaration was met with pure shock. Hartmann stared, his face a mask of disbelief as he repeated the name, questioning if Zeke truly meant the legendary poison dragon. Even his own father was aghast at the suggestion, stammering that the risks of hunting such a creature were far too great. He pleaded with Blink, but Zeke remained firm. He turned his intense gaze back to the desperate father, cutting through any hesitation. He questioned if Blink was truly in a position to choose, reminding him of his son's agonizing, bedridden state, where the slightest movement brought pain. He demanded to know if Blink understood the sheer, critical nature of the situation. He lays out the terms of his proposal with cold clarity. It is a gamble, he states, plain and simple. If they fail, Blink will die, but if they do nothing, his son is guaranteed to perish anyway. The weight of the choice crushes Blink, who can only stammer the boy's title. Zeke presses his advantage, his gaze unwavering, asking the desperate father if he truly wants to change his cruel fate. The choice, he declares, is Blink's alone. In response, Blink collapses to the floor. Casting aside all pride, the former knight commander prostrates himself completely, begging the young lord to please save his son. With a sharp, satisfied glint in his eyes, Zeke accepts. He gives his order, be at the designated location in 3 days. 3 days later, the meeting point is revealed to be the base of the formidable and desolate Torque Mountains. Now clad in traveling cloaks, Blink nervously scans the rocky terrain and asks Lord Zeke when they should expect the soldiers to arrive. Zeke internally scoffs at the question. He knows his parents would never waste valuable soldiers for the sake of one commoner's child. He thinks to himself that the real reason is his cheapskate parents wouldn't lend him any, but still, the principle stands. He reveals the truth bluntly. The idea of reinforcements was entirely Blink's own hopeful assumption. Blink reacts with stunned disbelief, shouting that Zeke had been seen assembling troops just days ago. The former knight's composure shatters. He accuses Zeke of utter madness for suggesting they face a basilisk with just the two of them. Zeke snaps back, warning Blink not to underestimate him. His voice echoes across the mountains as he poses a final, chilling question. Did Blink really think he would come all this way without some kind of ace up his sleeve? He asks if Blink actually has a plan. He met the unspoken horror with a sharp, confident smirk. He declared that he had a plan, and more importantly, that he had figured out how to survive in this unforgiving world. His intention, he explained, was to defy his own destiny. He would accomplish this by leveraging the unique knowledge that only a player from the original game could possibly possess. This knowledge led them to a grim destination, a barren, rocky clearing littered with the skeletal remains of massive creatures. A dark opening in the cliff face marked the entrance to the beast's lair. From the oppressive darkness of the cave, a low growl echoed. A monstrous, multi-eyed reptilian creature crawled into the light, its heavy footsteps crunching over the bones and skulls of its previous victims. The basilisk had appeared. In the midst of combat, Zeke lets out a sharp cry as he swings his sword, deflecting a viscous, dark substance launched by a slime-like foe. His shield is raised defensively, his expression one of intense concentration. The scene is revealed to be a training session, with Hartmann shouting encouragement for Lord Zeke to maintain his form. As he parries, Zeke internally reflects on the vast improvement in his swordsmanship, attributing it entirely to Blink's excellent coaching. The training is suddenly interrupted. Blink's face contorts with alarm as he spots a real threat approaching from behind his student. He yells a desperate warning to Zeke about the monster. Reacting instantly to the warning, Zeke pivots on his heel. With a grunt of effort, he brings his sword around in a wide, powerful arc, slicing cleanly through the ambushing creature. The monster dissolves into crystalline shards. Blink stares, his mouth agape in disbelief at the speed and precision of the counterattack. Zeke, breathing steadily, recognizes his own move. It was the basic combo cross-slash. The threat is neutralized. Watching from a distance, Blink is struck by the boy's prodigious skill. He marvels at the incredible talent on display, finding it hard to believe that Zeke has reached such a level after only a handful of training sessions. His admiration, however, is tempered by a harsh reality. He knows that despite this rapid progress, Zeke is still nowhere near ready to face a basilisk. Later, sitting alone, Blink is lost in thought, his expression deeply troubled. He can sense Zeke's innate talent with the sword and recognizes that the boy is far from ordinary. Yet, he cannot discern Zeke's true intentions, which makes him question if he can truly place his trust in the young lord. His unease grows as he recalls Zeke's recent behavior. The boy has been slipping away on his own again today, leaving Blink to wonder what in the world he is doing. His thoughts spiraled, weighing the boy's infamous family reputation against the desperate hope for his own son's recovery. The entire story about a special antidote for magic sclerosis felt increasingly dubious, a flimsy hope he was forced to cling to. A sudden call of Lord Zeke snapped him out of his reverie. He looked up, startled, to see the boy himself standing there. He immediately questioned the boy, demanding to know where on earth he had disappeared to. Zeke brushed off the concern, stating he was just taking care of something and, more importantly, that Blink needed to get ready. Before Blink could ask what he meant, a deafening roar ripped through the forest, causing both of them to freeze in shock. His eyes widened in horror as he recognized the sound. It was a basilisk, but its lair was supposed to be much farther away. The realization struck him with dread. His fear turned to fury as he confronted Zeke, calling him an idiot for his recklessness. Zeke calmly revealed the truth. The campfire wasn't for warmth, but was a special incense he had lit specifically to lure the basilisk to them. He countered Blink's sputtering disbelief, arguing that walking directly into the monster's den would have been far more dangerous. While the logic was sound, Blink remained deeply unsettled by the boy's calculated risk. Just then, the creature burst from the foliage. The massive basilisk charged forward. Without a second thought, Blink drew his sword and planted himself in its path, yelling for Lord Zeke to stay back. He was taken aback when Zeke calmly stepped past him, stating that Blink was the one who needed to stay back. The boy gave a precise order: do not move from your upwind position. With a confident smirk and a simple gesture of his hand, Zeke unleashed a cataclysmic explosion of dark energy that completely consumed the charging monster. Blink stared in disbelief at the source of the explosion, a magic mine, a pressure-activated trap. The realization of what was struck him with force. He turned to the young boy, demanding to know how he could have possibly prepared all of this and predicted the creature's exact path. Zeke, however, remained unimpressed, coolly dismissing the powerful trap as a cheap trinket, merely enough to handle such lowly cannon fodder. His confidence was absolute. He explained that he had slaughtered countless basilisks in the game, and knew the terrain and the creature's predictable movements like the back of his hand. As he spoke, the dazed basilisk began to stir from the smoky crater, shaking off the effects of the blast. In response to the monster's recovery, Blink drew his sword, ready to engage. But Zeke sharply ordered him to stop, telling him to stay out of his way and simply make himself useful by watching the perimeter. He hesitated, his hand tight on his sword's hilt. A thought crystallized in his mind. In terms of raw combat ability, he was clearly superior, but when it came to knowledge about this specific creature, Lord Zeke was undeniably leagues ahead. Trusting the boy's expertise for the moment, he lowered his blade. As Zeke stepped forward to face the beast alone, Blink couldn't help but wonder if the boy truly had some kind of hidden strategy. He resolved to obey. He watched as the basilisk, now fully recovered, charged towards the small boy. Blink remained on guard, steeling himself with the promise that he would intervene if the situation became a true emergency. The creature closed the distance in an instant, lunging forward with jaws agape. Zeke, however, did not flinch, holding his position as the monster bore down on him. He sidestepped the clumsy attack with ease, pivoting to strike the beast's foreleg with a precise blow from his small blade. The predictability of it all was almost disappointing. The attack patterns were just as boring as he remembered. Having created an opening, he suddenly roared for Blink to get back. The command startled the veteran knight, who could only watch as Zeke's expression hardened. It was time to end this. He shouted a final warning, telling Blink not to be foolish enough to stand downwind. The older man, still processing the boy's sudden command, could only ask what he meant by it. The beast did not wait for their conversation to conclude. It reared its head back, its maw gaping wide as it prepared to strike. From its throat, the basilisk unleashed a torrent of noxious vapor, its deadly poison breath. As the toxic cloud billowed towards the small boy, Blink could only watch in horror, crying out his name. The poisonous cloud completely enveloped the young lord, obscuring him from view in a swirling vortex of venom. Blink screamed his name, his voice filled with terror. His face contorted in a mask of pure horror, sweat beading on his brow as he stared at the seemingly fatal outcome. As the toxic mist began to thin, a wave of regret washed over him. He should have fought the beast himself, he realized with anguish. This couldn't be happening. He covered his face in despair, the weight of his failure crushing him. He apologized to his ailing son, Luke, believing he had utterly failed to secure the cure. Just as he surrendered to his grief, a soft sound drew his attention. A foot stepped onto the damp ground before him. Confused, Blink looked up, wondering where the water had come from. His gaze followed the source, revealing Zeke standing unharmed behind a massive, now shattering wall of crystalline ice. The structure had completely blocked the poison. Blink stared in disbelief, questioning if what he had just witnessed was magic. The boy turned to him with a confident smirk, rhetorically asking when he had ever claimed he couldn't use magic. Blink was speechless, realizing that Zeke had erected the massive barrier in a mere split second. He reflected on a crucial detail. The original Zeke was a naturally gifted mage who had simply never tried to use his powers. This meant he could wield powerful ice magic right from the start. With newfound confidence, he told Blink to be quiet and watch what he could do. In response to the boy's declaration, the basilisk let out a furious roar, its maw wide with aggression. Undeterred by the creature's fury, he stood his ground, sword in hand, calmly facing the massive beast. He then raised his blade as jagged ice began to form around it, the cold energy crackling in the air. Blink watched in utter disbelief as Zeke taunted the creature, calling it a foolish lizard. With a focused gaze, he commanded the magic with a single word, willing the ice to sink into and become one with the steel. Provoked by the display, the basilisk lunged forward, its massive body crashing through the clearing. But this was all part of his plan. He revealed his strategy aloud, explaining that he had intentionally lured the creature into terrain rich with water to amplify his power. He then unleashed his attack, shouting its name, Icicle Cross. Massive shards of ice erupted from the damp ground, violently impaling the charging monster. The former knight could only stare, his mouth agape, completely speechless at the overwhelming display. He, however, analyzed the technique with cold precision. It was merely the basic cross/combo, but when enhanced with his signature ice magic, it had become Zeke's ultimate finishing move. He stood over the defeated basilisk, internally celebrating his perfect execution of the plan. The abundance of water mana in the area had amplified his power, just as he'd calculated. He then turned his attention to his stunned companion, calling out to Blink. His expression hardened, a cold confidence replacing his youthful features. He declared that Blink now understood the extent of his power and, from this moment forward, would work for him. He demanded to know if his terms were understood. In response, the former knight commander stared up, sweat beading on his brow as his mind reeled. Who is this boy? Without a moment's hesitation, he lowered his head in deference, pledging his absolute loyalty to his new lord. Elsewhere, a peaceful scene was shattered by panicked cries. A warning echoed through the trees. Monsters were attacking. The unseen speaker urged everyone to run for their lives. The chaos had already struck. Splintered wood and shattered barrels littered the ground, the remnants of a caravan or settlement utterly destroyed. Amidst the wreckage, bodies lay strewn across the dirt. A man groaned in pain, curled on the ground near an overturned cart, a survivor of the brutal assault. The injured man, struggling to push himself up, looked toward the figure standing over him. With what little strength he had, he reached out, telling the girl that it was all thanks to her. She looked down at the survivor, her expression devoid of pity. Her gaze was cold as she spoke a name, Atri, before condemning the person as a cursed, abominable child. In the aftermath of the basilisk hunt, a crowd gathers in the town square around the creature's frozen carcass. The onlookers are stunned, questioning if this is a real basilisk. A guild official marvels at the beast, its organs frozen solid, and wonders about the kind of power that could accomplish such a feat. He asks if it was the work of the knight, Blink Hartmann, but another voice clarifies that it was Lord Zeke. The official reacts with utter disbelief, questioning if the so-called demon child of the Lagia's family could be responsible. Nearby, the red-hooded girl, Atri, also murmurs Zeke's name in surprise as the crowd buzzes with the revelation. As Blink and Atri walk away, the crowd's tone shifts from awe to contempt. They accuse Zeke of poaching the creature for profit, calling his actions disgusting and cruel. Overhearing their words, Zeke's face twitches with irritation. He resigns himself to the reality that his reputation is already ruined. No matter what he says or does, they will twist it against him. His internal frustration is interrupted by Hartmann, who approaches him with a look of pure gratitude. Blink exclaims that Zeke's progress is magnificent, and more importantly, that this success provides the necessary ingredients for the cure he so desperately needs. In response to the man's earnest praise, Zeke can only think one word: idiot. Blink, completely unaware of the boy's inner thoughts, continues cheerfully. He explains that the faster Zeke improves, the sooner he himself will become obsolete, a prospect he genuinely seems to look forward to. His voice carries over an image of a grand manner as he reveals the good news. Thanks to Zeke, his son Luke is steadily recovering. He also notes that his own public standing seems to be skyrocketing, though he claims he never asked for such a thing. Zeke reflects on this progress, acknowledging that things are on track for now. He steels his resolve, knowing he must maintain this pace to dodge the death flag and avoid the bloody bad end that haunts his knowledge of the future. Just then, their conversation is cut short by desperate cries. Two men, confined behind iron bars, plead with him. "My lord," one shouts, "we desperately need your help." Blink turns, asking what the commotion is about, as Zeke looks on. Within the Lagia's estate, Lord Lagia's expresses his disbelief and irritation. A direct appeal from Alhai village in the Northern Plains was highly unusual. His wife, standing beside him, agrees, remarking on how improper it is to skip the official channels. From the top of the grand staircase, Zeke watches as two men kneel before his parents. They beg for forgiveness for their intrusion, pleading for reinforcements as their village is under attack by magical beasts. One of the villagers explains the nature of the threat: a pack of breeze weasels. He clarifies that while the creatures are small and weak on their own, they become a significant threat when they swarm and utilize wind magic. His plea is met with a furious outburst from Lord Lagia's, who bellows that the idea is absurd. He refuses to waste resources on a poor village like Alhai, berating them for barely paying taxes and ordering them to handle the problem themselves. Zeke watches the scene unfold with a grimace, thinking to himself how typical this behavior is for the man he is related to, the scumbag Lord Lagia's. He watches the dejected villagers turn to leave. He recalls that the Northern Plains never even appeared in the game he knew, concluding that ignoring the situation shouldn't cause any unforeseen problems. But his detachment is broken when the two men turn directly to him, their faces streaked with tears. They plead with him, begging for his help and lamenting that they cannot return to their homes otherwise. He silences their desperate cries, declaring loudly that he will go. With a confident smirk, Zeke frames the decision as a way to bolster his reputation, even offering to turn the weasel's pelts into matching scars for them. His father looks on, a pleased smile spreading across his face. He remarks that his son is finally showing some spine befitting the Lagia's name. He concedes, agreeing to even provide a handful of soldiers for the expedition. As he follows the villagers out, Zeke overhears them questioning his motives, wondering if this is just for show. He internally sighs at the realization that even when trying to be a good guy, his approval rating continues to plummet. His father gives a final warning to retreat if things look dangerous, and Zeke agrees nonchalantly. His journey to Alhai village began, his own carriage following the villagers' covered wagon across a stone bridge and into the wooded countryside. The carriage rumbled along the dirt path, its wheels kicking up dust as it carried the young lord toward his self-appointed mission. Inside, the ride was interrupted when one of the villagers questioned why his son was tagging along. The boy, introducing himself as Luke, eagerly explained that he was back on his feet thanks to Zeke and pleaded for the chance to prove his worth. He regarded the boy with a dubious expression, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. There was something shifty about the kid, he thought, a sense of unease settling over him. The boy's father quickly interjected, asking forgiveness, but assuring Zeke that Luke was quite resourceful and could serve as his attendant. Luke himself passionately declared his aspiration to become a knight and swore he would repay this debt to Lord Zeke. Zeke considered the plea, the name echoing in his mind. Luke Hartmann. He wasn't around when he played through the game as the hero. He felt reality starting to drift further from the script he remembered, but concluded that as long as he was strong enough, it shouldn't matter. With a sigh, he relented. "Fine, do as you please." Luke's face lit up with joy, and he profusely thanked the young lord, promising he wouldn't be let down. The tension in the carriage shifted. As Zeke sat with his eyes closed, deep in thought, Luke stole a nervous glance in his direction, a bead of sweat on his own brow. Luke, unable to sit in silence, turned to another villager, asking why everyone, the soldiers, the common folk, despised Lord Zeke when his own father called him an incredible man. Overhearing the conversation, Zeke spoke without opening his eyes, advising Luke that once he truly got to know him, he would see the truth for himself. The boy looked back, his expression hardening with resolve. Upon their arrival at Alhai village, Zeke wasted no time. He addressed the village chief directly, stating his intent to get straight to the matter of the breeze weasels, questioning why the normally docile creatures had attacked. He listens as the villagers of Alhai, some on crutches, kneel before him in desperation. They explain that the beasts turned vicious all of a sudden, for reasons they cannot comprehend. One of them, his voice trembling, attributes the calamity to a cursed child. As the accusation hangs in the air, another villager points an accusing finger, his face contorted with fear and anger. He shouts that nothing but misfortune has plagued them since the day she was born, insisting it must be the cursed girl's doing. A dark-haired woman with striking light streaks in her hair observes the outburst with a cool, analytical gaze. The village chief quickly tries to silence the man, reminding him to be quiet in front of their guests. The man retorts, questioning if the chief is pretending not to know, and points out that the cursed girl is always nearby when the beasts go mad. Nearby, two of the creatures, known as breeze weasels, twitch and snarl amidst splatters of blood, their behavior far from their normally docile nature. Her expression remains unchanged by the commotion. The investigator leans forward slightly, her voice calm as she addresses the weary-looking chief directly, asking him to identify this cursed child they speak of. The chief's gaze becomes distant as he begins his tale. He explains that 12 years ago, a girl was born in their village with hair as white as snow. At first, the villagers thought it was merely a peculiar trait, but when the girl was 5 years old, a disaster struck. The village storehouse suddenly burst into flames, and to this day, no one ever discovered how the fire started. Amidst the smoldering ruins, they found a young girl, fast asleep inside the wreckage without a single scorch mark on her. When they pressed her for answers, all she would ever say was that she couldn't remember. He continues, his voice heavy with the weight of memory, stating that from that day forward, one disaster after another struck the village. The calamities were relentless. Crops withered, wells ran dry, and livestock dropped dead for no reason. The weather turned strange, and the beasts grew savage. Finally, the chief concludes with a pained expression. Even the girl's own parents collapsed and died instantly at the exact same moment. The investigator processes this grim history. The chief, his mind made up, turns to another villager and gives a sharp order. He commands the man to fetch the cursed child, declaring that since she was the only thing left standing that day, she will serve as their pointer and lead them to the scene of the latest attack. She arrived before a decrepit stone building, where a man's angry voice echoed, demanding the door be opened. As the door swung open, her eyes widened. Inside, a young girl in a red hood, identified as Atri, cowered on a bed of hay, her ankles bound in heavy iron shackles. Her expression hardened as a villager furiously ordered another man to get out. The man attempted to protest on the girl's behalf, but was quickly silenced and fled. Startled by the shouting, the shackled girl collapsed onto the filthy ground, trembling with fear. She stepped toward the girl, drawing her sword with a sharp ring of steel. She commented on the foul stench, prompting the terrified Atri to immediately begin apologizing profusely. She cut the apology short, asking why Atri was apologizing for the villagers' stupidity. The girl explained that as the cursed child, she was forbidden from using the baths when others were around. Her explanation dissolved into desperate sobs. Atri cried that everything was her fault. The monsters, the village's suffering, even her parents' fate, all because she was cursed. She then begged for the investigator to use the sword and end her life, insisting the villagers wouldn't dare object. In response, she grabbed the crying girl's face, forcing her to be silent. "Now you listen here, filth," she commanded coldly. His eyes narrowed with an undeniable authority. "The name's Zeke, he announced, his voice sharp. As the undisputed heir to the Lagia's domain, I've come to slaughter some beasts." He held her chin firmly, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. He asked if she truly thought some petty village curse meant anything, declaring himself to be far beyond such trivial matters. In a defiant, trembling voice, Atri looks up and declares her identity, a warning born of fear and isolation. She is the demon child of Lagius. His dismissive tone cuts through her declaration. He scoffs at the notion that a demon child could even touch him, finding the idea laughable. He questions her surprise at being chosen as a guide, stating bluntly that he has no time for her sniveling. Her only value to him, he asserts, is to lead him to the attack site. She stares, his name echoing in her thoughts. The title she has carried for so long, the demon child, feels hollow and powerless in the face of his complete lack of fear. Far from the village, under a star-dusted sky, a strange rustling breaks the silence of the northern plains. From the tall grasses, a pack of small, shadowy creatures emerges. They stand on two legs like twisted goats, their dark forms punctuated by pairs of glowing white eyes that pierce the darkness. One of the beasts lets out a silent roar, its maw gaping wide to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth, ready to tear into its prey. At a makeshift camp, soldiers prepare for an extermination mission. A young, light-haired investigator carries a crate, muttering his disdain for the fuss being made over mere breeze weasels. He finds the talk of the Lagia's demon child pathetic, concluding that the low morale and poor training of the Lagia soldiers are the real issue. Nearby, his dark-haired colleague observes him silently. As she and the red-hooded girl, Atri, walk through a nearby village, the villagers recoil, whispering warnings to one another not to look the taboo child in the eyes. From a distance, the two male investigators watch them pass. The light-haired one looks on with concern, murmuring about the cursed child. His more cynical companion scoffs, dismissing the notion of a taboo child as nothing more than a backwards village superstition. The dark-haired investigator quietly explains to Atri that the villagers are convinced she is the cause of every single misfortune they experience. Later, she stands before a line of armored soldiers and asks if the entire troop has assembled. A booted foot steps forward, signaling their readiness. She then announces to the group that the young girl beside her, Atri, will serve as their guide into the beast's territory. Atri flinches, looking deeply uneasy. Hearing this, the cynical investigator reacts with disbelief, questioning the decision to use a small child for such a dangerous task. His companion looks on, his expression one of pure shock. His eyes narrow as a dark realization dawns on him. He wonders if they actually intend to use the girl as bait. The expedition sets out, their covered wagons rumbling along a dirt path that cuts through a dense, quiet forest. Inside one of the wagons, the dark-haired investigator speaks to Atri. She acknowledges the girl's reputation as the taboo child, but assures her that the reasons given for it are almost entirely baseless accusations. She recalled the official reports. The misfortunes attributed to the child were all explainable. Crop failures from continuous cropping issues, a well that dried up because the groundwater path shifted, and her parents' deaths, which were nothing more than a simple accident. None of it had any connection to Atri. And yet, as she sat beside the girl, the investigator couldn't shake the feeling that something about the entire situation was deeply wrong. As she pondered this, the caravan of covered wagons rumbled onward, crossing a stone bridge and venturing deeper into the forested territory. Inside their wagon, Atri's voice trembled as she pointed towards the plains. She explained that this was the very spot where the breeze weasels had attacked before. Just as the girl spoke, the investigator's eyes narrowed. It was not a sudden gust of wind. She recognized it instantly as wind magic. She roared a command for everyone to hit the dirt as an invisible force slammed into the side of the wagon. The magical impact threw the wagon violently, sending Atri tumbling out with a cry of alarm. The horse tethered to the cart whinnied in terror, rearing up on its hind legs. Before the girl could strike the hard ground, Hartmann lunged and caught her safely. At the same time, the dark-haired investigator landed deftly, her weapon already drawn and her gaze fixed on the unseen enemy. She wasted no time, her voice cutting through the chaos. She ordered all units into battle formation, commanding them to move and protect the injured and non-combatants. Her sharp command startled the armored soldiers. One flinched and stammered an affirmation, while the others looked on, shaken by the suddenness of the assault. Their fear was justified. From the surrounding hills, a massive horde of bipedal creatures swarmed towards them. A cry of despair rang out. They were completely surrounded. The creatures swarmed them from all sides. The armored soldiers cried out in alarm, overwhelmed by the sheer number of beasts and questioning how they could possibly fight so many. In response to their panic, the dark-haired investigator roared at them to quit their whining. She reminded them that despite their numbers, they were still just pathetic weasels as a blade sliced through one of the creatures. She backed up her words with action, cutting down another weasel. Nearby, Hartmann also engaged the horde, shouting for the men not to falter. He confirmed that the creatures were weak, and inspired by his resolve, the soldiers agreed to press the attack. Following their commander's lead, the soldiers plunged into the fray, their swords finding their marks against the small reptilian beasts. Their success bolstered their morale, with one soldier remarking that they could wipe them out without breaking a sweat. The investigator, however, watched the battle with a narrow, calculating gaze. She acknowledged that the creatures certainly weren't strong, but her thought remained unfinished. Her unspoken concern was noticed by Hartmann, who addressed her as Lord Zeke. He commented that even a dimwit could see something was wrong, and the investigator agreed, pointing out the sheer numbers and the creature's uncoordinated movements. Blink grimly suggested that the area might have become a breeding ground. He elaborated on his fear. If this was an unnatural domain where monsters bred collectively, it was essentially an overworld dungeon. As he voiced that this was a monster colony far beyond their ability to handle, a much larger, shadowy beast with multiple glowing eyes emerged. The investigator gasped. Her attention was suddenly drawn to a powerful surge of energy. From her vantage point, she could see the entire battlefield and sensed an immense flow of mana originating from the caravan's location, sparking a dreadful realization. Back at the wagons, Hartmann tried to reassure a frightened Atri that they were safe. But just then, blasts of wind magic erupted from the weasels, striking down the guards. A soldier cried out in pain as another shouted a warning about their magic. The magical assault intensified. Luke instinctively threw himself over Atri to shield her as the chaos erupted around their wagon. A horse screamed as it was struck down, its body collapsing heavily beside them. Amidst the chaos of the attack, Atri was overcome with despair. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out that it was all her fault, that she was the cursed one, the taboo child, and should never have left the safety of her shack. She clutched her head, lamenting that she ever broke her chain or dared to believe in the hope she'd been offered. Watching her, Luke could only swallow nervously as she repeatedly apologized for accompanying him, begging for his forgiveness. Indeed, the swarm of breeze weasels surrounding them was unnaturally large, a concentration of monsters far beyond what would normally be encountered. The thought echoed in Luke's mind as he looked at the trembling girl, connecting her presence to the unnatural swarm, the cursed child. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the creatures froze in place, their advance coming to an abrupt halt. The sudden stop confused the armored soldiers, who wondered aloud if the monsters had lost their nerve. Their question was answered by the appearance of small, shadowy creatures with glowing eyes emerging from the ground. From her vantage point, the dark-haired investigator watched with alarm as the breeze weasels, far from retreating, turned in perfect unison and began to move with disciplined coordination. Near the caravan, Luke felt a shift in the air. He realized with dawning horror that the creatures were synchronizing their mana, amplifying it to an incredible degree. The monsters' forms began to distort, their bodies swelling as they gathered orbs of energy in their maws. Luke's eyes widened in terror as he recognized the advanced magic. "Air bullet!" he cried out. Before he could react, a massive, concentrated blast of wind energy erupted from the swarm, slamming into the caravan with devastating force. The impact threw both him and Atri to the ground. Their horse struck down beside them. Just as the devastating wind spell was about to obliterate the caravan, a new power erupted from the investigator's position. A volley of massive ice lances shot through the air, descending upon the monster horde with chilling speed. The lances found their targets instantly, shattering against the creatures and encasing them in jagged shards of ice, stopping their advance cold. This sudden turn of events left Atri bewildered, unable to comprehend the source of this new, powerful magic. Before her, the battlefield had been transformed into a frozen tableau. Spikes of crystalline ice jutted from the ground, impaling the monstrous creatures and leaving their ranks decimated. A voice cut through the stunned silence. The dark-haired investigator stood amidst the icy carnage, a confident smirk on her face as she declared it was time to teach them exactly who was the prey in this hunt. Her words, and the sheer power of the display, left both Luke and Atri wide-eyed with shock and disbelief. Even the seasoned soldiers were stunned. One questioned if it was ice magic, while another, his voice filled with awe, wondered aloud if it could possibly be the work of Lord Zeke. Their speculation was cut short as the ground began to tremble violently. Luke cried out, questioning if it was an earthquake. The investigator, however, remained unfazed, stating that this was right on schedule. She explained that if things followed the usual game system, breeding grounds like this were guaranteed to have a boss. As she spoke, a massive clawed foot slammed into the ground nearby. From the epicenter of the tremor, a new horror emerged. A colossal, plant-like monster, a true boss, rose before them, its maw-like head roaring a challenge to all who stood in its path. The dark-haired investigator surveyed the chaotic scene, her suspicions confirmed. This was a breeding ground, a colony of magical beasts, and just as she'd anticipated, a massive boss monster had appeared, a colossal, carnivorous plant creature roaring at the center of the fray. Her assessment proved correct as the expedition's armored soldiers were swiftly overwhelmed by smaller, shadowy creatures. One of the guards cried out in despair, certain they couldn't handle such an enemy. The investigator knew they were finished if the beasts used their coordinated attack again. This technique, the unison link, was a special maneuver where multiple users would synchronize their power, amplifying their combined mana to unleash a far stronger, unified assault. As if summoned by the thought, the colossal plant monster began to gather energy, its maw glowing ominously. The soldiers saw the attack coming and shouted a desperate warning. The creature unleashed a devastating blast, shattering the very ground beneath it and sending the armored soldiers hurtling through the air amidst an explosion of rock and debris. Amidst the chaos, another large, shadowy beast roared, prompting one of the remaining soldiers to desperately call for the formation of an ice wall for protection. Watching the defenses crumble, Luke Hartmann's face was a mask of terror. He stammered that at this rate, their only choice was to run. Beside him, Atri covered her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. His panicked words were cut short by a sharp, commanding voice ordering the worthless grunts to quit their squealing. The sharp command came from the dark-haired investigator, who stepped forward with her sword drawn. She demanded to know if they had forgotten who she was, Zeke Lagias, the demon child of Lagias. Luke, still reeling, could only stammer about the impossible odds, a weasel colony, its boss, and their unison link. He trailed off, but she stood firm. Zeke acknowledged that none of the threats should be underestimated, but declared with conviction that there were still things that could be done. Facing the colossal plant monster, Zeke Lagias calmly raises his sword, informing the beast that he has seen quite enough of its performance. His expression hardens with determination as he declares that it is now his turn, while the smaller shadow creatures screech in the background. He unleashes a torrent of magic, shouting ice shot. The spell slams into the large shadow beast, prompting the nearby armored soldiers to exclaim in amazement at Lord Zeke's unexpected magical prowess. The powerful blast sends the colony leader stumbling back, leaving one of its smaller minions decapitated on the ground, dark blood pooling beneath it. In response to the attack, the beast lets out a furious roar. Watching from a safe distance, Atri gasps, realizing that Zeke has only succeeded in enraging it. He remains undeterred, however, gripping his sword tightly. He affirms that this is a struggle for survival and vows that he will show no mercy. He then conjures an even greater spell, an icicle lance. The massive spear of ice forms and hurtles toward the beast. The onlookers are stunned. Luke fears it's no good, while the soldiers shout that the spear is too huge to dodge, believing the battle is won. The smaller shadow creatures, however, begin to act in concert. Their eyes glow as they initiate unison link, channeling their energy together. Empowered by their link, the colony leader unleashes its own devastating counter, an advanced wind magic spell called Delta Storm. The swirling vortex of wind slams into the icicle lance, causing a massive explosion that completely neutralizes Zeke's attack. Luke and Atri can only stare in horror as his ultimate spell is rendered useless. He ignores Atri's frantic warning, his gaze locked on the residual energy from the neutralized spell. Realizing the mana hasn't yet faded, he focuses his will, intending to freeze all of creation itself. With a cry of Icicle Ray, he unleashes a devastating barrage of ice projectiles. The spell instantly strikes the smaller shadow creatures and their colossal leader, encasing them in frost. The full force of the magic manifests, trapping the giant plant monster completely within a massive, jagged prison of solid ice. Witnessing this overwhelming display of power, both Atri and Luke are rendered speechless, their faces masks of pure astonishment. The moment of awe is shattered by the sound of cracking ice as the frozen prison explodes into fragments. Zeke, however, simply glances back with a calm, confident expression. Luke stares, his shock quickly replaced by analytical comprehension as he identifies the nature of the attack, a saturation bombardment. He realizes the brilliance of a strategy. Zeke had predicted the enemy would use their unison link, baiting their counter with mid to high tier spells. He knew the powerful technique had an inherent delay before it could be used again, and in that precise window, he unleashed his own wide area annihilation magic. From a hidden vantage point, the dark-haired investigator watches the outcome with cold admiration. She recognizes the chilling strategic acumen, sharp intuition, and overwhelming talent required to execute such a flawless plan. She puts a name to the boy's fearsome reputation, identifying him as the demon child of Lagius. With the battle decided, she turns to her unseen subordinates, declaring the show is over and ordering her grunts to move out. Unseen by the combatants, a terrified man hiding behind a tree overhears her. As the investigators' group departs, he trembles, whispering the only word that comes to mind, a demon. In the aftermath of the battle, the group finds themselves before a large manor on the outskirts of a now-quiet village. As they prepare to depart, the villagers gather. One man steps forward, speaking for the others, to express their profound debt to Lord Zeke for saving them. His voice, however, is laced with fear. While offering the village's deepest thanks, he cannot help but mutter about the terrifying demon of ice he witnessed. Zeke overhears the fearful whispers, his expression hardening with irritation. He had saved their village, yet they still looked at him as a villain, a role he grimly accepted as his own. Deciding he has had enough, he turns abruptly and announces to his companion that they are leaving, striding away without another word. As he walks, the red-hooded girl, Atri, hurries to catch up. She implores him to forgive the villagers, reminding him of all he had done to protect them. She looks up at him, but his reply is cold and dismissive. The mutterings of peasants, he states, are beneath his notice, leaving her momentarily speechless. But then, in a gesture that contradicts his harsh words, he gently drapes his own white cape over her small shoulders. He declares firmly that no matter what anyone says, he is who he is. He lifts her chin, forcing her gaze upward. He instructs her not to look down, but to look forward and advance. His words seem to reach her as she watches him walk ahead. From a distance, Luke and his cynical colleague observe the scene. The colleague voices his confusion, wondering aloud what the cursed child could be discussing with the ice demon. As the villagers dispersed, the cynical investigator leaned in close to Luke, whispering a warning to be careful around the girl, Atri, noting that she is Lord Zeke's favorite. The warning spread through the fearful crowd. One man cautioned the others not to try anything foolish, reminding them that the one they call the ice demon might just come back for them if they did. Meanwhile, Atri walked on alone, her expression hardening with resolve. She remembered Zeke's words, telling herself to look forward. In a swift, decisive motion, she drew a small knife and sliced off a lock of her long, light hair. She held the blade and the severed hair to her chest, her eyes wide with tearful determination as she looked to the sky and made a silent, powerful vow to become something more. Elsewhere, Luke approached Zeke, who stood in his investigator's disguise with his arms crossed, seemingly lost in thought. He suddenly grabbed Zeke's shoulders, startling him. With a bright smile, Luke declared that his performance was not bad at all for a future lord. His grin widened as he realized the truth. Zeke's menacing persona had just been an act. The disguised Zeke looked away, a bead of sweat on his temple, caught off guard by the observation. Zeke's mind raced. He lamented wasting precious time on an event that wasn't even in the game he remembered. He began to worry about how this deviation would affect the main plotline. especially since, if the game's story was followed too closely, his own death was a foregone conclusion. His thoughts sharpened, dismissing the game's script. He knew his swordsmanship and magic were so undeveloped that his death was practically guaranteed as things stood. What he needed wasn't to follow a script, but to gain real combat experience. He resolved then and there to do whatever it takes to get much, much stronger. Still, the young adventurer wondered about their path. The dark-haired investigator watched him, her gaze steady and unreadable. The focus shifts to the protagonist, Van, revealing his current circumstances. He is traveling as part of a small caravan, its covered wagons and carriage rattling along a dusty, rural road. As they rumbled along, the driver of his wagon turned back, shouting with exasperation. He ordered Van to put his sword away, announcing that they were nearly at the village. His command was met with protest from the back of the wagon. Van, fumbling with his weapon, couldn't believe the request, exclaiming that the sword was practically his soul. He refused to put away, instead gripping the hilt tightly as a glint of light flashed off the polished steel. He was a swordsman, after all. With a confident smile, he stood and presented the blade. This was Van, the protagonist of Wish Soul and the world's designated future hero. In his previous life, he was an average high schooler completely obsessed with a game called Wish Soul. Then, in a turn of fate he still struggled to comprehend, he was reincarnated as the game's main villain, Zeke. Now, in the courtyard of his family's estate, he trains relentlessly. The chilling knowledge of his predetermined fate, to be killed by the game's heroes, is a constant weight on his mind. To flip those death flags and survive, he knows he must become overwhelmingly powerful. With a fierce declaration that he is shooting for the top, he puts his full force into a swing, only for his practiced sword to shatter into pieces under the strain. He approaches his father, Lord Lagias, explaining the problem. His magic has grown so potent that his swords simply can't withstand the power he channels through them anymore. His father, however, beams with excitement, brushing aside the issue of the broken sword. He announces incredible news. A dungeon has been discovered right on their own land. Lord Lagias elaborates that dungeons are known to contain ancient weapons and powerful magic items that can't be found on the surface. To him, this discovery is a goldmine waiting to happen. A shocking realization dawns on Zeke. He recognizes this place from his past life. This must be the Lagias dungeon, a high-level area from the end of the game where the ultimate weapon, the Ice God's sword, lies dormant. He immediately understands the opportunity before him. The Ice God's sword should be more than capable of handling his immense magic. This legendary weapon is his ticket to becoming strong enough to defy his fate. Just as his hopes soar, his father explains a complication. It's a hassle, but protocol dictates that the kingdom's official survey team must be the first to enter. Zeke internally laments the typical government red tape as his father announces the team has just arrived and offers to make introductions. The survey team comes into view, an elderly man introduced as Sage Glance, a stern-looking young woman named Nightmia, and a cheerful young girl called Magician Marks. The survey team leader, an elderly man with long white hair and a beard, introduces himself with a calm but authoritative air. He is Glance Fold, and it is a pleasure to make their acquaintance. As he does so, Lord Lagias explains the team's credentials to his son, Zeke. He notes that Glance is highly skilled, even advising the Magician's Guild. The other members, Marks the Magician and Mia the Knight, are also seasoned professionals. Lord Lagias expresses his confidence that they will prove invaluable. But upon hearing the leader's full name, Zeke's expression freezes in utter shock. His eyes widen as he internally repeats the name, Glance Folt. His mind races, connecting the dots with the knowledge from his past life. He recognizes Glance Folt as this sage, a man of integrity and a member of the heroes party in the game. He was the leader of the very first survey team into the Lagias dungeon. He then recalls the grim fate of that very survey team from the game's opening events. They're completely wiped out. This event, known as the Lagias Dungeon Survey Team Annihilation Incident, was the prologue that set the main story of the game into motion. The consequences of the incident were severe. Glance, taking the fall for the failure, vanished into seclusion. However, House Lagias never forgave him, relentlessly placing blame for the botched survey. This constant condemnation drove a wedge between the Lagias family and the heroes, sparking future conflicts. He understands with chilling clarity what this means for him in his current life. This realization, that this is another one of his death flags, spurs him to action. He steps out onto the balcony, calling out to his father. He approaches the group with a determined look, his gaze steady. Addressing his father directly, Zeke makes a formal request. He asks to be allowed to join the survey. The request hangs in the air, stunning Lord Lagias, Glance, and Mia into silence. His audacious request was met with a weary chuckle from Glance Folt. The old sage found the boys' enthusiasm unencouraging, pointing out that dungeon expeditions are brutal for newcomers, and more importantly, they were already short on guards. The boy, however, had anticipated this objection. With a knowing look, he pointed out that without proper oversight, any discovered treasure would simply be a free-for-all for the survey team. The implication of thievery left his father sputtering in shock. His insinuation drew glares from the two younger members of the survey team. The magician, Marks, bristled, challenging Zeke to prove his claim and insisting she certainly didn't require an escort. Despite the team's irritation, Lord Lagias smiled with newfound pride. He observed that his son seemed to have finally awakened to his duties as the future head of the house. Zeke calmly added that, more importantly, he had been planning to acquire a suitable sword for himself anyway. With that, the matter was settled. Lord Lagias announced his decision with finality. Zeke would accompany the survey team. The declaration stunned Mia and Marks, but Zeke's expression was grimly determined. He had two objectives to crush the death flags hanging over this expedition. His first goal was to claim the legendary Ice God sword. His second, and far more critical, was to ensure every member of the survey team made it out of the dungeon alive. The three adventurers watched him, perplexed by the sudden gravity of the 12-year-old boy. Sometime later, deep within the stone corridors of the dungeon, the team proceeded cautiously. Knight Mia, clearly taking charge of the boy's safety, turned to deliver a stern warning, ordering him not to move without her explicit permission. As they walked, the young magician, Marks, muttered a glance in frustration, calling the insufferable little lordling Apen and reminding the sage that their own lives were on the line. Glance simply sighed, stating that it was the Lord's order, and they had no choice but to tolerate the boy's presence. Their progress soon came to a halt in a circular, pillared chamber. Zeke looked around at the apparent dead end and scoffed, calling it pathetic, which only served to further irritate Knight Mia. Ignoring his remark, Mark stepped forward to investigate. She instructed the others to search as she cast a spell, summoning a glowing orb of light. Zeke watched intently, recognizing the simple detection magic for what it was, a will-o-wisp. Her detection spell yielded no results, leaving the survey team to stare at the dead-end chamber. They speculated about the central structure, wondering if it was some kind of altar and if the dungeon was disappointingly shallow. As they pondered, Zeke stepped forward, reaching a hand toward the stone surface. Knight Mia cried out in alarm, shouting at the amateur not to touch it. He paid her no mind, placing both hands firmly on the structure as she continued to warn him about the potential for hidden traps. The moment his palms made contact, the wall behind the altar erupted with light, revealing a massive, glowing, and intricate magical pattern. The sudden activation left both Mia and Mark speechless. The young magician quickly identified the phenomenon as a warp zone, muttering that it was a predictable development. Zeke then explained his reasoning. Based on the construction, he deduced the dungeon was from the late prehistoric civilization. He stated that standard detection magic is useless against their devices, as they often use mechanisms triggered by specific magic wavelengths. A basic fact. His explanation did little to soothe Mia's temper. She angrily told the useless baggage to stay behind her where he belonged. Unfazed, Zeke simply walked past her toward the glowing portal. His quiet defiance made Mia growl in frustration. She fumed internally, convinced he had only found the warp zone by pure luck and was now acting like a hotshot. Beside her, Sage Glance watched silently. The sage's calm exterior hid a growing unease. He stared at the boy's back, wondering where on earth Zeke Lagias could have acquired such knowledge. He questioned just what kind of person the boy truly was. His thoughts were interrupted as Zeke, having passed through the portal, suddenly unleashed a spell, shouting "Ice Shot" as he fired multiple shards of jagged ice forward. He continues deeper into the dungeon, not waiting for his companions. They can only watch as he single-handedly triggers a pressure plate mechanism that was clearly designed to require 3 people to operate. Without breaking stride, he casually bypasses a trap designed to crush intruders from above. He then approaches a stone puzzle, arranging the blocks in their precise stacking order without a moment's pause, leaving magician Marks to stare in disbelief. As they follow, Knight Mia voices her utter confusion to Marks. She remarks that Zeke is moving as if he owns the dungeon, wondering aloud if it's possible he has been here before. Marks seems equally bewildered, but Sage Glance interjects, stating that Mia's theory is incorrect. He calmly instructs them both to look more closely at the boy. The sage explains his reasoning. Zeke can barely stay on his feet. He is burning through his stamina at an alarming rate. This is not how someone experienced with the location would behave, which raises an even more pressing question. As if on cue, Zeke glances back over his shoulder, his attitude sharp. He calls them incompetents and questions if it's nice to be strolling along, chatting, as if on a picnic. Yet, it becomes clear that his abrasive words are a deliberate tactic to keep them at arm's length. Despite this, he is the one who always takes the lead, never once letting his guard down. This contradiction strikes Sage Glance. His eyes widen slightly as a new, startling possibility begins to form in his mind. Unaware of the sage's dawning realization, Zeke looks back at his companions walking behind him. He makes a private assessment. These people are strong. He continues his internal analysis. Knight Mia hasn't broken her concentration for the entire duration, constantly ready for battle. Magician Marks keeps her detection magic active nonstop, showing absolutely no sign of fatigue. And then there's Glance, whose magic flow is unwavering and demeanor perfectly calm. He reflects on his companions' formidable skills, admitting to himself that they probably could have made it this far without his guidance. This thought, however, leads to a troubling question from his memories of the game. How could experts of such high caliber have been wiped out? As he ponders this, Magician Marks gives voice to a similar unease. She turns to him, her expression questioning, and asks why they haven't encountered a single magic beast yet. He listens, his own expression turning grim. Her question lingers in the oppressive silence of the corridor as he and Sage Glance walk onward. He internally agrees. Even with him disarming traps ahead of them, the complete lack of monsters is fundamentally wrong. His knowledge from the game floods his mind with images of what should be here. The dungeon was supposed to be crawling with tough enemies, from hulking horned beasts to skeletal mages. The stark contrast between his memory and their current reality sparks a terrible premonition. A deep, unsettling feeling begins to churn within him. The feeling solidifies into a horrifying certainty as they step through an archway into a large, open chamber. He realizes they might have already walked right into a death trap. His gaze snaps to the center of the room, and his eyes fly open in sudden, horrified recognition. There, resting on a stone dais amidst swirling mist, is a magnificent blade. He knows it instantly, the legendary Ice God Sword. Magician Marks gasps, awestruck by the incredible magic power radiating from the weapon, declaring it a treasure. As she eagerly steps toward it, however, Zeke's mind screams a warning. Something is terribly wrong. There's no time to explain. He lunges forward, shoving Marks hard to the stone floor as he roars, "Don't touch it." A split second later, a massive burst of frigid energy erupts from the sword, encasing the dais in jagged ice. He had anticipated this reaction. Just as he thought, Sage Glance pointed an accusatory finger, shouting his name. The old man tried to restrain Night Mia, but she was already yelling at Zeke in disbelief. Before she could press the issue, he grabbed her arm, his gaze sharp and unwavering. He asked her directly if she didn't realize he was trying to protect them. Mia, taken aback by his intensity, could only manage a confused sound. As they spoke, the Ice God's sword began to crackle with unstable energy. Magician Marks watched it, then looked back at the sage, her expression filled with confusion as she questioned what he was doing. Suddenly, the stone floor beneath Zeke's feet fractured and gave way. He cursed under his breath as the trap finally sprung, the ground collapsing into a pit below. The collapse revealed a massive, intricate magic circle etched into the chamber's true floor, which now pulsed with an immense, crackling power. His companions could only stare from the ledge, their faces masks of pure shock and horror at the sight unfolding before them. From the heart of the glowing circle, a colossal figure rose, its horned silhouette blotting out the light. The true nature of the trap was revealed, an archdemon, now towering over the lone boy. Within a vast, circular stone chamber, a monstrous creature materializes, its dark, armored body and great wings casting a terrifying shadow. The adventurers stand frozen. Sage Glance stares in disbelief, identifying the beast as an archdemon, a legendary species he thought only existed in tales. Night Mia, her hand on her sword, warns everyone to proceed with caution. Before any plan can be formed, Zeke surges forward, thrusting his hand out and unleashing a spell. He calls out, "Icicle Lance X3," and 3 sharp projectiles of pure ice rocket towards the towering demon. His impulsive action draws a sharp rebuke from Mia, who demands to know why he is acting alone instead of fighting cautiously. Unfazed, Zeke understands his own strategy. This initial strike is not meant to defeat the beast, but to serve as reconnaissance, a way to gauge the enemy's capabilities. The lances of ice shatter harmlessly against the complex, glowing magic circle that appears before the archdemon. It remains completely unscathed. Magician Marks cries out in shock at the sight, while Zeke stares, his mind racing as he wonders if the creature possesses some form of anti-magic skill. He quickly realizes the truth. It is an archdemon, a rare monster exclusive to special events in the game he once played. He recalls its notorious difficulty, a true pain whose attack patterns change with every encounter. There is no doubt about the formidable foe they now face. As this realization dawns, the archdemon slams its massive fist into the stone floor, shattering the ground. Mia's gauntlet hand clenches tightly, her voice filled with rage as she recognizes it as the very beast that wiped out the original survey team. The resulting shockwave rips through the chamber, violently throwing the small magician, Marks, from her feet. Zeke can only watch in horror as she is tossed helplessly through the air. Mia screams her companion's name in terror. A cry of pain escapes Marks as she hurtles towards the unforgiving stone floor. She hits the ground hard. Zeke realizes with a cold sweat that she was taken out in a single blow. As Glance shouts for her to stop, Mia grits her teeth, her resolve hardening. If magic won't work, then her blade will have to suffice. Ignoring the sage's plea, she charges forward, her sword glowing with power as she unleashes her ultimate technique, Peerless Sword Dance. Her sword strikes the archdemon's barrier, but the attack is effortlessly repelled with a deafening crash. The dark-haired investigator watches in disbelief, realizing that the creature blocked physical attacks as well. The blow sends her reeling back onto the stone floor. Just then, Marks rises behind her, having recovered from the earlier blast. She extends a hand and invokes a powerful spell, calling upon Ignis, the King of Flames, to burn their enemy. Her spell, a swirling vortex of advanced fire spirit magic engulfs the archdemon. The investigator recognizes the power of the attack, noting that it's a different attribute from her own ice magic. The fiery assault proves useless as the archdemon manifests a third shield. The creature then looms over Sage Glance, who has moved to intercept it. From the ground, Mia cries out a warning to the sage. In response, the sage's hands tighten around his staff, his knuckles whitening with the strain as he channels an immense amount of power into the weapon. He raises the glowing staff high above his head, his expression one of pure, focused resolve as he prepares to unleash his full might. With a powerful downward thrust, he slams the staff into the ground, unleashing a technique he calls the evil Shattering Flash. Mia and the investigator immediately recognize it as the sage's signature move, a special attack imbued with all elemental magic. The concentrated blast of energy streaks toward the archdemon's head, a strike the sage believes will surely finish it. The impact triggers a massive explosion of dark energy and shattered stone, the force of the blast radiating outwards as Zeke watches from a distance. But as the smoke clears, the archdemon stands entirely unscathed. Steam rises from its dark form, the sage's ultimate attack having had no effect whatsoever. As the dust from the massive spell settled, Knight Mia and Magician Marks erupted in celebration, believing their combined assault had succeeded. The dark-haired investigator, however, saw the truth, her face contorting in horror as she cried out in denial. Their joy was short-lived. The archdemon stood completely unharmed, the last vestiges of the spell dissipating harmlessly against its form. The party stared in shock. The dark-haired investigator understood immediately, realizing they were witnessing the demon's true ability. From his unique vantage point, Zeke Lagius's mind raced, analyzing the phenomenon. He identified the source of the invulnerability, for distinct shields, layered together to nullify any and all attacks, be they physical or magical in nature. Armed with this new knowledge, the dark-haired investigator shouted a warning to the others that a massive attack was incoming, and that their only hope was to break through those shields. As the archdemon loomed, its maw gaping, the party scrambled to defend, erecting an ice wall and a magical barrier. The demon unleashed a concentrated blast of energy from its hand. The force was overwhelming, shattering their hastily made defenses and sending Sage Glance and Magician Marks flying through the air amidst the debris. Struggling to her feet, the dark-haired investigator grunted in pain, her body battered. She could only stare in disbelief at the sheer, insane power the creature possessed. Before anyone could recover, the archdemon began gathering energy for another assault. It was clear to the battered heroes that there was no way they could possibly dodge it in time. In that desperate moment, Sage Glance acted. Tearing off the remnants of his robe, he revealed a powerfully muscled physique and threw himself in front of his companions, spreading his arms wide to become a living shield. He stood firm as the dark-haired investigator cried out, demanding to know what he was doing. Nearby, Knight Mia voiced her own frustration, declaring it laughable to call herself a knight if she couldn't even protect a single child. The sage paid them no mind, turning his head slightly to look back at the investigator. With a gentle expression, he addressed her as Lord Zeke, confiding that he has a grandson right around his age. He thrusts a faceted, crystalline object toward the dark-haired investigator, his hand scratched and worn. He commands her to take it and get away, and she stares, recognizing the item with a jolt of surprise. The object is an ancient relic, a warp orb. He explains that it will transfer its user to any location within its range, lamenting that it's a shame they couldn't acquire more, as this one is only enough for a single person. Hearing this, Magician Marks whirls on him, her voice sharp with disbelief. She demands to know if he's insane, refusing to simply run away alone. He retorts that someone must bring back the intelligence they've gathered, or their entire disastrous mission will have been for nothing. The grim reality of their situation underscores his words. Marks clutches at her chest, blood trickling from her lips, while Knight Mia struggles to stay upright behind her. The investigator watches them, her expression hardening. Stepping forward, Sage Glance faces the looming archdemon. He acknowledges that they are all running on fumes, himself included, but then declares with certainty that he knows how to take the beast down. His confidence forces a terrible choice upon the investigator. She inwardly screams, questioning if abandoning them to save her own skin is truly the only option left. As if sensing her turmoil, Glance speaks over his shoulder, his voice low and steady. He tells her not to worry. He braces his hands on his knees, his muscular frame trembling with effort. He reveals that they have one last ace up their sleeve. The investigator stares, sweat beading on her face, completely bewildered. She asks what he could possibly mean by an ace. In response, Glance, Mia, and Marks unleash their final gambit. The three warriors channel their remaining power, their weapons meeting in a blinding flash of light as they execute a combined technique, the unison link. The investigator recognizes the technique being prepared. It is unison link, a high-level skill where multiple individuals synchronize their magic to amplify their collective power. As she rises to her feet, Knight Mia scoffs at her and Magician Marks, calling them pathetic excuses for fighters. She declares that if that's the case, she'll have to use her own power to succeed, asserting that there is still a way. Marks can only react with a stunned what? In response, the investigator's eyes flash with power as she forcefully invokes the technique herself. Unison link. A torrent of energy erupts from her, forcibly enveloping the entire party. Mia and Marks cry out in pained surprise, questioning how she just forced her way into their synchronization. Sage Glance stares in utter disbelief. He reflects that it took them years of brutal training to master Unison Link, yet this newcomer just barged in. The investigator looks back at him with a condescending smile, asking if he really thought something even morons could manage would be beyond her. With the link now firmly under her control, the empowered party turns to face the archdemon. The investigator declares that it is time to turn the tables, and with a final command of, "Let's go," she leads the charge. The archdemon stood protected by 4 nigh-impenetrable shields. Each of its opponents was a master combatant, yet even their ultimate techniques had failed to breach the dark barriers. Just as it seemed they were completely stuck, the investigator realized the truth. The very fact that their attacks were ineffective was the clue she needed to find a way to break through. With this newfound clarity, the party rallied. Sage Glance, battered but resolute, declared that it was time for their counterattack. He acknowledged the uncertainty of their plan, wondering aloud how far their combined strength would take them, even with their magic amplified by a technique known as Unison Link. A prior instruction came to mind, a warning to use a teleportation orb to escape if the battle turned against them. The voice had been insistent, telling them to stop hesitating. But the investigator, her eyes filled with grim determination, dismissed the thought. She was certain they would not need such an escape route. Empowered by the Unison Link, the party's magic surged. Magician Marks announced that while she normally couldn't perform such a feat, her boosted power now made it possible. She slammed her hand to the ground and unleashed a torrent of energy, summoning a colossal creature of fire from the stone floor, the Flame Emperor Phoenix. The fiery beast surged forward, crashing into one of the archdemon's dark shields. Marks poured her will into the attack, commanding the Phoenix to burn them all to ash. To the astonishment of Knight Mia and the investigator, the impenetrable barrier gave way. The archdemon's shield simply melted under the overwhelming power of the flames. The combined magical force strikes true, shattering one of the archdemon's 4 defensive barriers. The first shield is down. As the shield disintegrates, the investigator understands the true nature of their power. The Unison Link does more than simply multiply their force. It allows them to overcome the shield's unique defense mechanism, which requires simultaneous strikes from at least 2 attackers to be broken. Their technique concentrates the force of all 4 of them into one unified blow. Seeing this, Van grips his weapon, declaring that with 3 shields remaining, it is his turn to attack. Before he can move, Knight Mia surges forward, a blur of motion as she charges the archdemon alone. The dark-haired investigator cries out in alarm, shouting a warning to the reckless knight. She glances back, her face a mask of fierce determination, and shouts for Van not to underestimate her. In her current state, she feels more powerful than ever. The archdemon scoffs internally, confident that an attack from a single person will be utterly ineffective. But as Mia closes the distance with impossible speed, the investigator can only watch in stunned silence, realizing this must be another effect of the Unison Link. In a sun-dappled forest, a powerful unicorn with a gleaming white coat gallops with thunderous hoofbeats, its single horn pointed forward as it flees. As it flees, Luke Hartmann, sword drawn, points after it, informing a silhouetted figure that the beast went that way, though he quickly adds that he doesn't need to be told. He has already cornered the beast. Zeke, now 15 years old, stands before the unicorn, which has reached a dead end against the cliff face. He calmly informs the creature that it's trapped, a smirk playing on his lips as he wonders if it has finally decided to fight. The unicorn accepts the challenge, charging forward with its horn aimed directly at Zeke, who braces for the impact. A bright flash erupts as horn meets defense. He smirks, asking the creature where it's looking as frost begins to creep along its horn. The unicorn, believing its attack successful, lets out a triumphant neigh. But the creature's confidence is misplaced. The unicorn it struck shatters into shards of ice, a mere illusion. Zeke stands nearby, unimpressed, calling the legendary beast pathetic for falling for such a simple trick as the real, unharmed unicorn rears in shock. With the real unicorn momentarily stunned, Zeke unleashes a segmented blade, swinging it in a clean arc. As he does, Luke Hartmann appears behind him, observing with a smile that Zeke is a real softie after all. The young man, Luke Hartmann, now also 15, holds up the prize, the unicorn's horn perfectly severed. He explains to a surprised Zeke that the cut was so clean, the unicorn didn't even get hurt. His observation is correct. The horn was removed without drawing a single drop of blood, as the flesh was merely a hindrance to the true objective. Luke offers a knowing wink, confirming his point. In the distance, the now hornless but otherwise unharmed unicorn gallops away to freedom. He holds up the severed horn, a bright smile on his face. He tells Zeke that letting such a rare magical beast go free, even with his terrible attitude, proves he is full of compassion. Zeke internally reflects on this attachment. Luke, the son of Blink Hartmann, whom he had saved from magic sclerosis, had grown incredibly close to him over the past 3 years. He walks alone by the water's edge, his thoughts turning inward. Luke could be a nuisance, but his true concern lay elsewhere. Suddenly, a skeletal arm bursts from the water, its bony fingers clamping around his neck and shoulder, yanking him back with surprising force. As the skeletal creature holds him fast, he understands. The death flag from the game's plot were still active. It had all started the day he acquired the demon's sword in the dungeon. A voice echoed in his mind, ancient and powerful. It declared itself the demon's sword of Lagias, bound by a covenant to the last of the Lagias line. His mind reels from the revelation. He couldn't recall a demon's sword of Lagias from the game, nor did he understand the meaning of a covenant. Just then, Luke's voice cuts through his panic, cheerfully announcing he was stepping away for a moment and telling Zeke to catch up. The sword's voice resonates once more, a dark energy swirling around the blade in his hand. It imposes its will upon him, declaring that he is now forced to be Zeke Lagias. A nearby youth stares in alarm, questioning what is happening with the sword. Zeke's own eyes are wide with a different kind of terror. The weapon somehow knew his true identity. He quickly amends the thought. It wasn't about his identity. The horrifying truth was that no matter his intentions, his actions were being forcibly twisted to fit the narrative of the cruel villain, Zeke Lagias. A wave of despair washes over him, and he clamps a hand over his mouth. He couldn't even speak this truth aloud. A chilling premonition warns him that if this curse continued, it would inevitably lead to his death. He lay pinned beneath the skeletal creature, his mind reeling. The demon's sword's voice echoed, confirming that according to the game's logic, Zeke Lagias is fated to die. He shouted in disbelief, protesting that he had done everything differently to avoid this exact outcome. He mentally listed his efforts, diligent training, learning swordsmanship from a knight, even avoiding the conflict with glance. He was certain he had handled everything perfectly. But the sword dismissed his attempts, explaining that with his current missing memories, death is unavoidable. Those memories, it revealed, are locked away. The sword clarified its meaning as Zeke stood, clutching the blade. The memories that are inconvenient to him playing the role of Zeke Lagias have been sealed. He processed the chilling implication. His role in the game could only mean one thing: his destiny to be defeated by the protagonist. The realization struck him with cold dread. The sword then offered a trade. In exchange for these missing memories, it would grant him power. A brilliant light flared from the weapon, pulsing with energy. The voice addressed him as the last of the Lagias line, bestowing upon him the underworld eyes that perceived death and commanding him to defy his fate. A jolt coursed through him. Moments later, Luke Hartmann approached, noting that Zeke had been gone for a while. As Luke's voice called him a crude knight from the bushes, Zeke ignored the comment. His gaze was fixed on the sword in his hand, wondering what kind of weapon it truly was. The other boy emerged, full of questions about the powers and the underworld eyes he had overheard. A strange pattern appeared in Zeke's eye, but he noted internally that the sword had gone silent, leaving him to wonder if it was even an item from the game. Sometime later, the two traveled through a rocky pass. In a bizarre development, each boy was carrying the full skeleton of a defeated monster strapped to his back. Without warning, the skull on Luke's back swiveled its head, its empty sockets fixing upon him. Luke's face twisted in pure terror, while Zeke, just ahead, turned back with a look of wide-eyed shock. He shouts for the creature to stop, his mind racing. He theorizes that it must be some kind of reaper, an entity that perceives death. But that explanation falls apart under a simple question. If so, why can everyone else see it? His senses suddenly scream a warning, prompting him to bellow for his companions not to move an inch. Luke, along with a tall, bare-chested man and a dark-haired woman, freeze in their tracks, startled by his command. They obey just in time. The ground before them gives way with a deafening roar as the entire hillside collapses in a cascade of rock and earth. Staring at the devastation, the woman wonders aloud if it's a landslide or somehow related to the damage they caused in the dungeon. Her question goes unanswered as Luke turns to Zeke, praising his sharp observation. The tall man agrees, stating that Zeke saved them, while the woman marvels at his incredible intuition. Despite their praise, Zeke's focus is elsewhere. The tall man observes that the Reaper has vanished, prompting Zeke to wonder internally if its disappearance is a direct result of them successfully avoiding death. He reflects on his new ability. Ever since he was given these eyes that can perceive death flags, the demon sword of Lagias has remained completely silent. His gaze falls upon Luke walking ahead. Though he still doesn't know what part of his memory is missing, he knows there's only one thing he can do. With renewed determination, he resolves to simply keep avoiding the death flags. He reasons that, in situations like this, it's standard procedure to unknowingly clear some hidden mission. Doing so is often the key to unlocking one's memories. Lost in this strategic line of thought, he doesn't notice Luke's concern. As his companion asks if he's all right, Zeke simply concludes to himself that his plan will probably work out. He paused mid-thought, a sudden realization dawning on his face. His abrupt change in demeanor drew a weary glance from his dark-haired companion. As Zeke beamed, she couldn't help but wonder with a hint of exasperation if he, too, was some kind of important character. This line of thinking was fueled by a desperate internal need. He felt an overwhelming urgency to remember everything, and fast. Their journey eventually led them to a large, impressive building in the next town, the Adventurers Guild. Inside, as the group stood before the counter, the receptionist presented a gnarled, spiraling object. Luke Hartmann's eyes widened in amazement, exclaiming that it was a real unicorn horn and noting how rare it was to even catch a glimpse of one. His dark-haired companion, however, fixed the nervous receptionist with a stern glare. She stated flatly that she doesn't take on requests she can't complete. Beside her, Zeke pleaded with her not to be so scary, while Luke simply laughed. Luke then spoke up in Zeke's defense, explaining to the receptionist with a confident smile that Zeke tends to be misunderstood because of his sharp tongue. Deep down, he assured the man, Zeke is more righteous than anyone he knows. The flustered receptionist stammered that, in a way, he supposed Zeke treats everyone equally. The dark-haired woman remarked that Luke had actually managed to make him say that. Their conversation was interrupted by another guild employee. Excuse me, the person said, announcing that a new client was requesting you two by name. Luke looked up, surprised. US? He questioned. The employee confirmed, adding that the client was waiting in the back room. They had specifically asked for the duo whose recent exploits had been particularly remarkable. For the past 3 years, Zeke had worked as an adventurer, focusing on subjugation quests to earn his own money and gain combat experience. As he and Luke ascended a grand staircase, he remarked that this was the first time they had ever been requested by name. Luke agreed that it was a rare occurrence. He explained to their companion that he had started tagging along with Zeke for his own reasons, and now they were essentially a duo. He then put his hands behind his head, musing aloud that he'd have expected the client to cancel the request upon discovering he was from the infamous House Lagius. From behind, Zeke dryly asked if he wanted to be put back in bed permanently. Their dark-haired companion, however, was lost in thought. She admitted she had been wondering the same thing, speculating that they were likely hired based on their track record alone, though she quickly dismissed her own serious tone by saying she was just kidding. Their conversation ended as they were led into a well-appointed room. A tall, cloaked man stood waiting for them. The woman's eyes widened slightly as she wondered what kind of person this client could be. The man turned to face them, his features partially obscured by his high collar, and formally thanked the 3 adventurers for coming. He then stepped aside, revealing the person they were truly there to meet, a young woman with light, braided hair and a solemn expression. Her name was Seal Astella. Upon seeing her, the dark-haired woman's eyes widened in shock. She recognized her instantly. More importantly, she knew that Seal was one of the protagonist party members from the game. Her mind was immediately filled with a grim vision of Seal standing beneath the shadow of a looming skeleton. The woman understood the terrible implication at once. It was a death flag. Inside a well-lit room lined with bookshelves, a group of adventurers meets their client. The young woman, possessing long, silver-blonde hair styled with a braided crown, introduces herself with a calm expression. Her name is Seal Astella. Her name and appearance send a jolt through the light-haired adventurer, Luke Hartmann. He exclaims in disbelief that she is from the ducal house of Astella and possesses silver hair. Beside him, his dark-haired female companion observes the scene with a sharp, analytical gaze. This revelation carries immense weight. In the kingdom of Dibale, silver hair is the undeniable proof of royalty. If not just a portion, but all of one's hair is silver, it signifies an even greater standing. The dark-haired woman processes this information, understanding that it marks Seal as one of the most gifted and prominent members of the entire royal family. Despite this, she remains utterly impassive. Appalled by her lack of deference, Luke grabs her arm and drops to one knee, admonishing her for being disrespectful. He insists that even a commoner like himself knows what silver hair means. His outburst catches Seal by surprise, her eyes widening slightly. The dark-haired woman, however, merely glances at Seal with a dismissive look, questioning aloud what difference her hair color makes. She then steps forward with purpose, her boots thudding against the floor. She declares that since they're the ones who were summoned for a task, they have no need to be humble. Taking a seat on a nearby couch, she leans forward and states firmly that if someone is going to ask for a favor, they're the one who should watch their attitude. Luke is aghast at her audacity, his face a mask of shock as he warns her that such behavior is practically a capital offense. Behind him, another armored companion looks on. Seal, however, seems amused by the display. She brings her hands to her lips, a small, knowing smile playing on her face as she remarks that it seems the rumors about the dark-haired woman are true. She leans forward with a confident smile, deciding to dispense with pleasantries. She asks if she should get straight to the point. With that, she begins her explanation, revealing the grim truth of the matter. An unknown plague is currently spreading through a regional city, leaving its victims collapsed in the streets. The dark-haired woman's eyes widen as Seal continues, stating their suspicion that it might be magic sclerosis. The name hits the woman with the force of a physical blow, though Seal admits the case is unprecedented, so they cannot be certain. She then formally makes a request, asking the two of them to help confirm the nature of the disease and treat it. Luke listens, his expression somber as he realizes this is the same affliction he once suffered from. Leaning on the table with a knowing look, Seal adds that she sought them out specifically because she heard they were both quite knowledgeable in this area. The woman's expression hardens at the compliment. She thinks to herself that Seal is not just some sheltered princess. She knows things. After all, she herself developed the cure's formula and forced the Adventurers Guild to swear secrecy about its origins. Hearing this, Luke turns to his companion, his face flushed with a mix of surprise and hope. He starts to say that if that's the case, then perhaps they can help. Before he can finish, she cuts him off with a single, blunt word, her chin resting on her hand in a posture of complete disinterest. I refuse. Luke stares in disbelief, shouting her name, Zeke. She doesn't even glance his way, stating that this has nothing to do with her, and they should deal with it themselves. She adds that he must be kidding. Her internal thoughts reveal her reasoning. She refuses to travel with someone who has so many death flags surrounding them, especially not to a city teeming with a deadly disease. In her mind's eye, a grim skeleton looms directly behind the oblivious Seal. Her refusal was met not with anger, but with a calm, knowing smile from Seal Astella, who noted the answer was predictable. She raised a hand, adding that if they persisted in their refusal, there would be a consequence. The consequence was severe. Seal declared she would have both of their adventurer licenses revoked. The threat struck Zeke and Luke with the force of a physical blow, causing them both to jump to their feet in shock. Seal maintained her pleasant demeanor, claiming she was merely trying to learn the Legia style. Zeke, however, was seething internally. This woman was supposed to be the saintly heroine of the game, yet here she was, using her authority to spy on people and make threats. Her mind raced with the implications. Making an enemy of Seal at this juncture, with the power she wielded, would be a catastrophic problem. Cornered and sweating, she reluctantly conceded, agreeing that they would take the job. Seal's smile widened instantly, and she clapped her hands in delight, chirping that she knew they would agree. With the arrangement settled, they eventually departed from the city building. Later, as their horse-drawn carriage rumbled through the countryside, Luke decided to revisit the topic of their departure. He recalled how, at the end of their meeting, Seal had bowed her head and formally thanked them for graciously accepting the job. The memory prompted Zeke to question the use of the word graciously, reminding him that they had been threatened. Luke simply smiled, replying that it was because Zeke is, in fact, a very kind person. He continued cheerfully, stating his belief that she would have accepted the mission in the end anyway. His optimistic assessment earned him a dark, exasperated glare as Zeke thought to herself that there was absolutely no chance of that. As the pair departs, Seal Astella watches them, a faint blush on her cheeks as she reflects that Zeke is, after all, the one who saved her life. Luke, oblivious to her thoughts, cheerfully remarks to his stoic partner that the two of them seem to share a very strong bond. He continues his lecture, telling Zeke that he needs to become a respectable person like Lady Seal. He questions if Zeke's dismissive attitude is an appropriate way to treat his savior, acknowledging that while Zeke is ill-mannered and hated, Seal is an example to follow. Turning to Seal, Luke asks if she respects him, then enthusiastically declares that her efforts to save her people make her the very model of a noble. Her smile fades, replaced by a somber expression as she prepares to reveal the truth of her situation. She explains that while she may possess royal blood, she is what one would call an illegitimate child. Her lineage was undeniable, as she was born with full silver hair, a trait anyone could recognize. It was for this reason, she continues, that the ducal house took her in. However, she confesses to a stunned Luke that because of her origins, she is not well-liked within the family. He can only stammer that he had no idea. Her gaze hardens with resolve. One day, she declares, she wants to be worthy of her silver hair, the mark of royalty, and become a noble whom everyone can be proud of. As she speaks, Zeke silently recalls hearing some lore related to that. To achieve that dream, she concludes with unwavering conviction. She is prepared to do whatever it takes. She offers a faint, knowing smile, remarking that his determination is very admirable. Their journey takes them to Apen, a regional city in the western Etran territory. Upon arrival, however, Zeke stares out at the cityscape in shock, a sense of dread washing over him as he questions what he is seeing. His mind is suddenly flooded with a terrible vision. Skeletal figures, omens of death, looming over the sick and dying in the streets. He realizes with dawning horror that signs of impending doom are everywhere. The grim premonition give way to an equally grim reality. As Seal looks on with concern, a woman's cry for help pierces the air. She screams that her husband has collapsed, another victim of magic sclerosis. Reacting instantly, Zeke kneels beside the fallen man. Seal calls out his name, her voice laced with urgency and concern. While he assesses the situation, Seal acts decisively. To Zeke's surprise, she hoists the large man onto her back with considerable strength, declaring that she will carry him to the hospital. Her destination is a large, foreboding building designated as the Epidemic Patient Quarantine Facility, established to handle the city's crisis. Inside, the scale of the tragedy is overwhelming. Countless patients lie in bunk beds, so numerous that even the caregivers have been pushed past the point of exhaustion. Later, Seal and Luke regroup, but Zeke is missing. Seal asks where he could have gone, and Luke looks on in disbelief, voicing a shocking thought, that Zeke might have actually run away. He finds Zeke inside a building and immediately confronts him, demanding to know where he has been. Unfazed, Zeke simply states that they're in a terrible state of affairs. He turns to Seal, his expression grave, and insists on speaking with her privately. Startled by his urgency, she immediately asks if he has discovered something. Leading her away from the others, he explains that the affliction felt wrong for a disease, prompting him to investigate on his own. He then presents a large, cloth-wrapped object, revealing he unearthed it from the very center of Apen. As he pulls back the cloth, the object's true nature is revealed. A grotesque artifact of bone and dark paper, pierced through with several long, crude nails. With grim certainty, he declares that the city is not suffering from a disease, but from a powerful curse. He questions her, asking how she could not have sensed the curse's potent energy. Seal looks down, troubled, confessing that she felt nothing of the sort. The revelation strikes him with clarity. He remembers that in the world he knew, Seal was a master of divine arts, capable of purifying any curse. But here and now, in this reality, she is in her pre-awakened state, possessing none of that power. He understands they are on their own. They must find a way to solve this crisis without relying on the divine powers she has yet to unlock. Their private conversation is cut short as the surrounding citizens erupt in panic, having overheard the terrifying words, "Cursed object." The crowd turns toward them, their fear palpable. The realization spreads through the panicked onlookers. One man exclaims that it all makes sense now, why no healing magic had any effect. Another, his face contorted with anger and fear, demands to know who could be responsible for such an atrocity. Their desperate eyes fall upon Seal, pleading for a solution. Is there a way to counter it? One person shouts. Flustered and powerless, she can only stammer that she doesn't know yet, her answer doing little to quell their rising terror. He watches the scene with a grim, steady gaze as the citizens cry out that they are at their breaking point. The weight of the city's desperation now rests squarely on their shoulders. He slams his fist against a nearby wall, the stone cracking under the impact. With a glare, he commands the panicked crowd to be silent. His sudden act of aggression startles the citizens, who fall silent and stare at him with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Despite their fear, a murmur of hope spreads through the crowd. One of them reasons that if a curse is truly the cause, then surely Lady Seal, a practitioner of the divine arts, can resolve it. As Seal looks on with distress, an elderly man, the facility's director, steps forward. He invokes the legend of the silver-haired maiden, his words capturing the attention of the desperate onlookers. He recounts the famous tale of a time long ago when disaster struck the city. To save it, the daughter of the Astella family offered herself to the gods. The director explains that ever since that sacrifice, the silver-haired maiden has been revered as one who holds the power to quell disaster. The other citizens begin to recall the story, their faces filled with a dawning, dangerous hope. His explanation reaches its climax as he points a finger directly at Seal. He declares that they now have one such maiden right there in their midst, causing both Luke and Seal to look on in alarm. The director's accusation hangs in the air, his finger aimed squarely at the stunned Seal. He repeats his declaration for all to hear. They have a silver-haired maiden right here. As the crowd's attention fixes on Seal, a sharp pain lances through Zeke's head. He cries out, clutching his temple as a sudden influx of information overwhelms him. He realizes with horror that a part of his memory has been unlocked. He now remembers this event. It's part of Seal's backstory episode from the game. As this thought surfaces, the crowd's murmurs turn to shouts, demanding a sacrifice. The legend, they cry, is happening again. He stared at Seal, the crowd's chants of sacrifice echoing in his mind. A critical piece of the puzzle clicked into place. If this was the case, then being chosen as a sacrifice was the very event that awakened her powers as a divine arts practitioner. This knowledge, however, offered no comfort as the desperate pleas of the citizens filled the air. He knew that even if he didn't intervene, Seal was supposed to survive this. But a horrifying vision flashed through his mind, a skeletal figure binding her tightly. His eyes widened. No, wait, if she was meant to survive, then why? The answer materialized as a dreadful premonition. A colossal skeleton holding a terrified Seal aloft before a cheering mob. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. Instead of being resolved, Seal's death flag was only growing larger. Seal Astella's ambition burned brightly within her. She vowed that one day, she would become a noble whom everyone could be proud of, and she was prepared to do anything to achieve that dream. That resolve was immediately tested in the harsh light of the present, where a desperate crowd of citizens surrounded her. They fell to their knees, begging Lady Seal to save them, pleading with her to become a sacrifice for the good of all. As Seal stared in shock, Luke watched in horror, while Zeke's expression remained cold and observant. The air was thick with their collective anguish, a silent chorus of weeping and desperate prayers. Amidst the chaos, a single thought crystallized in Zeke's mind. This was the perfect opportunity. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise to address Seal directly, reminding her of her own words about wanting to become a noble everyone could be proud of. The hooded man in armor immediately seized upon this, declaring it a chance for her to finally prove her worth to the people. Seal was left speechless by the sudden, coordinated pressure. He continued, his gaze steady, telling her that she needed to think about what she could do to make that happen. His words ignited the crowd. The villagers began to shout their agreement, raising their fists in the air, their desperation now channeled into a single, unified demand. Zeke watched the scene unfold with a flicker of satisfaction. The armored man pressed his advantage, telling Seal that Zeke was right and demanding she make her decision. Unable to watch any longer, Luke cried out Zeke's name, a desperate attempt to halt the manipulation. Zeke turned slowly to face him. He rushed to the armored man's side, insisting that Zeke hadn't meant it like that. The man in the hood simply stared back, surprised by the boy's outburst. Before the argument could escalate, the facility director intervened, his voice cutting through the tension. He gave the armored man an ultimatum. They had until noon tomorrow. He warned him never to forget it. The armored man's face tightened, his eyes narrowing at the imposed deadline. The armored man looks at Seal, asked Stella with desperation, his voice ringing with urgency as he insists that she alone is the one who can save their town. His plea hangs in the air, and Seal reflects on the situation. She acknowledges to herself that Zeke's words had been cruel, but she feels certain he wasn't actually telling her to become a sacrifice. As she wrestles with this thought, Zeke, from a distance, considers her plight. He urges her internally to think, to figure out what she can do. His unspoken encouragement seems to reach her. Seal's eyes widen slightly as a realization dawns on her. He's right. Having found her resolve, Seal walks through the town at night, holding a lantern. She decides she will try to find what she can do, starting with the other plan she had conceived, speaking to the director again. She approaches a large wooden door, but stops short as a voice from within reaches her. She immediately recognizes it as the attendant's. Peeking through a crack in the door, she overhears the conversation. The attendant asks if the matter of the sacrifice is proceeding smoothly. A woman with long, light hair replies that Lady Seal has announced she is calling a divine magic user to town to heal the patients while she searches for the culprit. The news clearly displeases the conspirators. The long-haired man, who had helped incite the crowd earlier, expresses his outrage, questioning what will happen after he went to all the trouble of riling everyone up. The facility director listens nearby. A hooded man calmly tells the others not to panic. He outlines a new plan. He will visit the ducal house tomorrow as a messenger and claim that divine magic users are rare and can't be dispatched for at least 6 months. This, he predicts, will cause an uproar among the desperate citizens. He continues with a smug grin, mocking Seal's trust in the ducal house's power. He declares it's laughable, asserting that they would never lift a finger to help. Overhearing this, Seal is struck with shock and disbelief. She recoiled from the door, the conspirators' words confirming her worst fears. It was all a scheme, a plot to use the curse as a pretext to dispose of her as a sacrifice in the first palace. Their voices continued from within, dripping with scorn. They called her delusional, mocking the very idea that a commoner's daughter, who just happened to be born with silver hair, could ever think she'd be accepted as a noble. The cruel revelation struck her with the force of a physical blow. Numbly, she turned and walked away from the door, the truth of her situation settling upon her like a shroud. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of the betrayal crushed her spirit. What on earth have I been doing? She questioned herself, her resolve crumbling into despair. Behind a now-closed door, the meeting concluded. The man in ornate armor turned and departed, his part in the conspiracy fulfilled for the time being. He left the facility director alone with the hooded man. The two exchanged a silent, smug smile, a shared, sinister understanding passing between them. As night fell over the town, casting long shadows across the rooftops, others were set into motion by the dire circumstances. A young guard, his face set with grim determination, vowed that he would absolutely not allow Lady Seal to be sacrificed. He believed that if he could find and destroy all the cursed objects causing the affliction, he could solve the crisis himself. He was not the only one with this goal. Elsewhere, Zeke Lagias moved through the darkness, his expression cold and focused, certain that the boy he knew as Zeke was also out searching for those same items. The guard's search, however, proved fruitless. He slammed a fist against a railing in frustration, crying out that he couldn't find a single cursed object. Unseen on a rooftop above, a shadowy figure watched his every move. He watched from the shadows as the young guard's search was violently interrupted. A hooded figure lunged, accusing the guard of being the one destroying his cursed objects. The guard, caught completely by surprise, could only react with shock. The accusation hung in the air, and the guard wondered if Zeke was the one who had been looking for the cursed objects all along. From his hiding spot, Zeke observed the confrontation, his expression unreadable. The attacker, enraged, declared that the guard would not get away with interfering with the curse. As dark, corrupting energy swirled around his blade, he lunged forward, roaring for the guard to shut up and die. He found his body frozen in place, unable to move as dark, tentacle-like appendages snaked around his arm and sword. The attacker noted that while the guard seemed to be a decent swordsman, he was weak to magic, specifically brainwashing magic. The guard realized with horror that his body was moving on its own. With the guard completely under his control, the attacker mockingly suggested he kill himself. The guard strained against the magical compulsion, his own hand forcing his sword towards his throat. The blade drew closer, and he screamed internally for it to stop. Just as the tip was about to pierce his skin, Zeke, still observing, muttered with a hint of annoyance, "Good grief." In that instant, jagged shards of crystalline ice erupted from the ground, shattering the dark tendrils of the curse with a sharp crackle. As the remnants of the curse dissipated, he stepped out from the shadows, looking down at the freed guard. He coolly questioned how the guard could call himself his partner while struggling against such a pathetic opponent. He cried out Zeke's name, overjoyed to find he could move again. The guard explained that Zeke had cut the flow of magic. He then turned to Zeke, slightly flustered, saying that if Zeke was going to hunt cursed objects, he should have asked him to come along. The hooded attacker, meanwhile, stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend how Zeke had broken his spell. He calmly explained that curses are simply another form of magic. He pointed out that someone like the guard, who couldn't even perceive the flow of magical energy, would have only been in the way. He stood ready beside the now-freed guard, sword held forward. With a confident look, he announced that it was time for their counterattack to begin. Their opponent, however, was unimpressed. The masked man scoffed, certain that they stood no chance against his dark magic, as shadowy energy began to coil. In an instant, monstrous tentacles covered in suckers burst from the ground, surrounding the pair. The attacker roared from a distance that adding one more person to the fight would change nothing. His eyes narrowed with cruel intent as he revealed his true strategy. He would simply force them to kill one another. As if on cue, the young guard's expression went vacant. He lunged, swinging his sword directly at Zeke, who swiftly raised his own blade to block the unexpected attack. Watching his spell take hold, the attacker's eyes widened with manic delight. He commanded them to slaughter each other, but his triumph was short-lived. A sudden surge of power erupted, shattering the dark magical influence. The attacker recoiled in shock, letting out a strangled cry. Stunned, the masked man could only stammer in disbelief. Zeke looked on with contempt, declaring that to call such a crude technique brainwashing was an overstatement. He elaborated that true brainwashing is a delicate magic. While the attacker's crude spell might be enough to control the simple-minded guard beside him, it was utterly useless against someone of his own caliber. Enraged by the dismissal, the attacker shifted tactics. He questioned how Zeke would handle a physical dark magic assault, then unleashed a new spell, Dark Gravel, sending a volley of shadowy projectiles hurtling not at Zeke, but directly at the recovering guard. He deftly evades the volley of dark projectiles, his movements swift and precise as he closes the distance to his assailant. The magical pebbles shatter harmlessly against the ground around him. His swift advance pays off. The hooded attacker is now on the ground, defeated. As the guard stands over him, the man admits that in terms of pure physical combat, the guard is his equal. Before the guard can press for answers, Zeke's voice cuts through the tension, stating that there was something he forgot to mention. The defeated man's eyes widen in fear, but his focus shifts as he furiously demands to know why the curse was spread, just as blood erupts from his body. In a final, desperate act, the attacker slams his hand onto the ground. A complex, glowing magic circle instantly spreads out beneath him, bathing the area in an ominous light. Watching from a distance, Seal and Luke cry out in alarm, recognizing the signs of summoning magic. The circle erupts with power, violently throwing the attacker's body aside as a monstrous form tears its way into reality. A hulking, goat-headed beast with a grotesque, tentacled arm looms over them. Seal gasps in horror, identifying the creature as a cursed demon. Zeke's expression hardens with a dreadful understanding. He realizes this is the very event that was supposed to trigger Seal's awakening. They are facing the worst possible enemy. Panicked, Seal shouts to Luke that their own skills are useless. The demon can only be vanquished by divine magic. As she speaks, the cursed demon lets out a deafening roar, a ball of destructive energy forming in its gaping maw. Seal, Astella, sits alone on the steps, tears welling in her eyes. She laments her own foolishness, thinking that a commoner like her could ever be truly accepted just because she was born with silver hair. Her thoughts drift to the cruel whispers of the townspeople, recalling their plan to sacrifice a silver-haired maiden to break the curse. She scoffs bitterly, knowing they would feel no gratitude. The painful realization washes over her. They would simply be relieved to finally be rid of her. A sob escapes her lips as she covers her mouth, unable to hold back her tears. A sudden crash from outside shatters her despair. Her head snaps up, eyes wide with alarm. She rushes to a balcony overlooking the city and stares in horror. A massive explosion has erupted in the distance, sending a plume of black smoke into the night sky. She wonders aloud what could be happening. From the heart of the chaos, a monstrous creature emerges. The goat-headed demon, its arm a grotesque tentacle, smashes through buildings, raining down destructive energy. Amidst the destruction, Zeke Lagias confronts the beast, his sword clashing against its massive tentacle. He grits his teeth, realizing with frustration that his holy arts can do little more than scratch it. The best he can do is hold it back. Nearby, the young guard Luke shouts at the terrified citizens, urging them to get back. He warns them of the extreme danger as they cry out in confusion about the unfolding chaos. As he holds the line, Zeke glances over his shoulder at the fleeing crowds, his attention drawn to something in the distance. Seal runs toward Luke, calling his name and demanding to know what is happening. He turns, surprised, and quickly explains that he and Zeke had tracked down and cornered the sorcerer responsible for the curse. However, the sorcerer used summoning magic to unleash the demon before they could capture him. He desperately shouted for everyone to run, warning that nothing besides holy arts would work against the summoned cursed demon. Zeke, however, assessed the situation with cold logic, recognizing that a crisis of this magnitude presented a unique, albeit dangerous, opportunity. He realized this desperate battle might be the very catalyst needed to awaken Seal's latent talent. As a monster let out a deafening roar, its grotesque tentacle arm whipped through the air, forcing Luke and the terrified citizens to dive for cover. The creature lunged, its maw wide open as it bore down on the scrambling civilians. In response, Zeke threw his hand forward and bellowed a single command. Ice wall. A colossal barrier of jagged ice erupted from the cobblestone street, forming a crystalline shield that halted the demon's attack just inches from people. With the monster momentarily contained, he turned his fury on the stunned onlookers. He ordered the small fry to get out of the way, urging them to get up and run. Seal watched, breathless, as he took command of the chaos. She began to flee, only to realize with a start that she was heading in the wrong direction. At the same time, some of the citizens Zeke had just saved fell to their knees, thanking him profusely for keeping them safe. Their gratitude, however, quickly curdled into fear and accusation. One man pointed, declaring that the demon only appeared after Zeke showed up. Another agreed, calling him a walking curse. Seal stopped in her tracks, utterly bewildered by what the people were saying. Just then, Zeke's voice came from behind her, announcing that he had found where she was hiding. He approached, his expression grim, and explained that while he had managed to hold the demon off, his barrier wouldn't last much longer. Shocked by his sudden appearance and the dire news, Seal could only utter his name. He looked at her intently, his gaze piercing. "Seal," he said, his voice low and serious. "Don't you feel any change within you?" His question hangs in the air, and Seal can only stare back at him, completely bewildered. She asked what he could possibly be talking about, her expression a mixture of confusion and unease. Her uncertainty is met with growing impatience from the nearby citizens. One man calls her a jinx, while another angrily demands that if she's a mage, she should stop standing around and destroy the monster. He observes her, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. The plan isn't working. He realizes that something crucial is missing. Her power should have awakened by now. There must be some final, undiscovered key. This grim thought is overshadowed by a new, terrifying sight. A colossal skeleton, radiating a dark aura, rises above the city rooftops. He curses inwardly, recognizing that a death flag now hangs over everyone. His eyes narrow as he studies the skeletal behemoth, noticing a peculiar detail, a large crack running across its ribcage. He wonders about its significance. At that moment, the cursed demon shatters the ice wall. The citizens cry out in renewed terror, one lamenting that he can't take any more, while the other questions the strength of their supposed protectors. Their panicked accusations finally reach Seal. Her expression hardens with frustration as she whirls on them, shouting that they should hurry up and take care of it themselves. He turns his head, his voice cold and sharp. He dismisses their complaints as worthless noise, questioning how they can say such things when others are risking their lives for them. Seal looks over, startled by his tone. She covers her mouth, shocked by his words. He continues, asking if she thinks a noble's duty is to coddle the masses. He states that he would rather be the one to kick them into line. He turns away, his expression one of pure contempt. He declares that he couldn't give a damn what those pigs think. His cynical words struck Seal as Stella, leaving her stunned and kneeling on the cobblestones. She stared, unable to fully process his declaration as the cursed demon continued its rampage nearby. A nearby citizen shared her disbelief. "What did you say?" she stammered, a terrible understanding dawning on her. She realized with shame that her desire to save the people had been intertwined with a selfish need for their approval. All along, she had been more concerned with how they perceived her than with the act of salvation itself. The thought crystallized into a harsh truth. If there was no praise to be gained, a part of her felt it was as if there was no point in saving them at all. This selfish motivation was a betrayal of the ideal, noble she strove to be. As she clenched her fist in frustration, Luke Hartmann watched with growing concern, calling out her name. He then delivered the grim directive. They were abandoning the city. He needed her, Lady Seal, to lead the evacuation. The order caught her completely off guard, leaving her to question what her own role would be in this retreat. Her moment of indecision was shattered by a ferocious roar from the cursed demon. In that instant, her path became clear. She had made up her mind. With newfound resolve, she drew her sword and declared she would face the beast herself. By standing her ground, she could at least buy enough time for everyone else to escape the city. She knew her shining silver hair would stand out in the darkness, making her the perfect decoy. While Zeke held the creature back, she could draw its attention and ensure the citizens' safety. Her selfless act did not go unnoticed. The citizens watched in awe, calling her incredible and realizing that her sacrifice would grant them a much safer evacuation. From the sidelines, Zeke observed her decision. He then raised his own blade, a dark, swirling energy beginning to coalesce around it. With a focused gaze, he addressed her not by name, but by a title heavy with meaning. "Oh, scion of Lagias." He grips the sword, a look of dawning comprehension on his face as a voice resonates in his mind. He recognizes it instantly, the magic sword of Lagias. His eyes widen in shock at the sudden revelation. Understanding the situation, he approaches Seal, who recoils in confusion, demanding to know what he is doing. He simply states that she is the final key. With a firm grip, he holds her steady, positioning the tip of the magic sword directly over her chest. As Luke cries out her name in alarm, the sword plunges downward, not piercing flesh, but shattering a glowing, chain-like seal that had been placed upon her. The magical chains break apart as immense power is released. Feathers scatter as magnificent wings burst forth from Seal's back. She ascends into the night sky, now an angelic figure bathed in a holy light, as the citizens below, including a stunned Luke, gaze up in utter disbelief. Zeke explains that Seal's power had been sealed away by someone. Luke recalls the earlier incident where Zeke severed a flow of magic, realizing the connection. Zeke confirms that the magic sword of Lagias allowed him to destroy the seal without harming her body, a feat that required an unimaginable level of delicate magical control. High above the city, Seal unleashes her restored power, calling forth a brilliant shower of light she names Holy Rain. The silver rain descends upon the populace, curing them of their ailments. One man exclaims that his sickness is gone. In stark contrast, the same holy drops sear the flesh of the cursed demon, causing it to roar in agony. Writhing under the purifying light, the cursed demon's grotesque form begins to dissolve into nothingness. Luke watches, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he realizes the creature is actually disappearing before him. As its cursed flesh evaporates, the creature's skeletal core is revealed for a moment before it too shatters into countless fragments. Zeke calls out to his companion, explaining that the crack on the skeleton's chest was the clue he had been looking for. He looks up towards the sky, now clear and graced by a rainbow, as white birds fly past. With a sense of awe, Zeke remarks that this moment marks the dawn of the legend of the Silver Saint. Seal Astella's eyes flutter open. She finds herself lying in a bed as an unseen voice expresses immense relief, confirming that Lady Seal is awake and safe. She sits up abruptly, her body tense with confusion. Looking around the unfamiliar room, she wonders aloud where she is and what has happened. A sudden panic grips her as memories of the crisis flood back, and she urgently demands to know the fate of the city and the demon. The voice explains that it was she, Lady Seal, who defeated the demon. Furthermore, they tell her she summoned a silver rain that washed away the curse entirely. Seal stares back in disbelief, unable to process the idea that she could have accomplished such a feat. Elsewhere in the large ward, other patients who have been comatose are now on their feet, celebrating their miraculous recovery. They joyfully proclaim that they owe their lives to Lady Seal. She looks down at her own hands, a tremor of uncertainty running through her. With a confused expression, she admits that she doesn't remember anything. One of the healed men kneels before her, taking her hand with reverence. He declares her the Silver Saint, hailing Lady Seal as a living legend of Apen. Her face flushes with embarrassment. She stammers a denial, insisting that she couldn't possibly have done it all by herself. Then a sudden, piercing thought cuts through her confusion. Her expression shifts to one of sharp concern as she urgently asks for the whereabouts of Zeke. As she attempts to rise, a gentle but firm hand presses on her shoulder, holding her back. A voice urges her not to overexert herself, and she winces as a wave of exhaustion washes over her. She remains in the recovery ward, looking dazed as Luke Hartmann stands beside her, a comforting hand on her shoulder. He tells her that her exhaustion is to be expected, given the incredible divine magic she used. Seal confesses that she doesn't remember much and that the events don't feel real to her. She offers to explain what happened the previous night, adding that while there are still a few loose ends, she believes Zeke is taking care of them now. Meanwhile, far from the city, a man in armor and a dark hood gallops furiously through a forest. He grips his horse's reins, cursing his misjudgment and expressing disbelief that Seal would actually awaken her powers. He recalls the sight of her with angelic wings, realizing with dread that she can purify not just demons, but the curse itself, a complete contradiction to the reports that labeled her a failure. Suddenly, an unnatural chill cuts through the air, startling him. The frigid force intensifies, violently throwing him from his rearing horse. As he tumbles to the ground with a cry of shock, a silhouetted figure observes him from the path, calmly noting that he seemed to be in quite a hurry. The figure steps forward, revealing a young man with dark, bobbed hair and wearing a long coat. He brushes a hand through his hair, his expression cool and composed as he asks the fallen rider, "Running off somewhere?" The armored man stares up from the ground, his face a mixture of sweat, dirt, and pure shock. he recognizes his assailant. Stammering out the name, Zeke Lagius? With a cold gaze, Zeke demands to know what he is doing there. He presses his advantage, questioning if the man actually believed Seal's nonsense and directly accusing the ducal house of pulling the strings. The armored man scrambles to his feet, hastily claiming he was only joking about the ducal house orchestrating the curse. Zeke leans closer, his eyes sharp and intimidating. He states plainly that he simply saw someone fleeing the city in a panic and decided to follow them out of sheer curiosity. The explanation does little to soothe the armored man, who begins to sweat profusely under the intense scrutiny. A tense silence hangs in the forest air, broken only by the rustling of leaves as the confrontation reaches a critical point. In the center of Apen City Plaza, a man in armor stands frozen mid-attack, encased within a massive, jagged shard of ice that has shattered the cobblestones at its base. This frozen spectacle is presented to a shocked Seal, Astella. Before her stands Zeke, in his older form, who calmly states that it is exactly what it appears to be. He clarifies that this is not the mastermind, but merely the operative who carried out the curse. He then directs her gaze to the captive's neck, asking if she recognizes the tattoo there. Seal examines the intricate, skull-like design, but admits she does not, questioning its meaning. Zeke dismisses her ignorance with a curt, "You're useless." He explains the tattoo's critical importance. The sorcerer who summoned the demon had the very same mark. He confirmed it on the corpse himself, leaving no doubt. The connection leaves both Seal and Luke stunned. Luke begins to protest that even if Seal is unaware, Zeke interrupts, turning his attention back to Seal. He declares that he wagers her half-brother knows something about it, causing her to gasp in shock. Luke cries out in disbelief at the implication. A terrified Seal begs Zeke not to march on the ducal house, but he is unmoved, declaring his plan to present this lovely, frozen specimen as a gift. Luke argues that this alone is too weak to be used as evidence. Zeke scoffs at the notion, calling it ridiculous. Ignoring Luke's caution, he fixes his gaze on Seal. "Seal," he commands, "deliver a message to your brother." She stands her ground, momentarily stunned by the boy's message. With renewed defiance, she tells Zeke that if her half-brother has business with her, he should face her himself. Her confidence wavers as a sudden realization dawns on her. The request sent through the Adventurers Association was just a pretense, a test orchestrated by the kingdom to determine if she was a person of value. Zeke confirms her unspoken thoughts, explaining that he had tried to avoid drawing attention by operating as a common adventurer. He concedes, however, that this approach likely only made him look more suspicious in the end, recalling a past battle where he dispatched a unicorn with ease. He continues, listing his impossible feats, discovering a cure for magic sclerosis, wiping out the beast hordes on the northern plains, and delving into the Lagia's dungeon. With a slight smirk, he tells her that such accomplishments have made her impossible for anyone in power to ignore. It was, he notes, exactly what he'd expect from the esteemed house of Astella. He then reveals a stunning truth. He is part of the intelligence agency that steers the kingdom from the shadows. Luke, standing nearby, gasps in disbelief, asking if what he heard is true. Zeke ignores Luke's outburst, his gaze fixed on Seal. He asks for a final verdict, addressing her as Agent Seal. She begins to respond, confessing that she, too, had her suspicions about him. Her thoughts drift as she admits that while she suspected Zeke was plotting something, his true intentions remained a mystery. But everything changed when she saw him in the dungeon, risking his own life to protect them all. Looking at him with genuine admiration, she confesses that his selfless actions embodied the very image of the ideal noble she had always aspired to be. She resolved that this was the truth she would report, her gaze fixed on the grand estate before her. However, she harbored a deep uncertainty. She knew she was also being tested by the ducal house and could not be certain they would even listen to her. Hearing her doubt, he let out a short, sharp laugh, telling her not to be ridiculous. He then reminded her of her new reality. She was the Silver Saint now, a title that neither the kingdom nor her family could afford to ignore. The weight of his words left her momentarily stunned, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. As they spoke, nearby citizens whispered amongst themselves. One man questioned what Zeke was discussing with Lady Seal, while another remarked on the strangeness of seeing the demon child so close to their saint, noting how much things had changed. He paid the onlookers no mind, instead offering his congratulations. He declared that she was now a true maiden of Astella. She turned away slightly, rejecting the sentiment with a simple no. She insisted that none of that mattered to her anymore. Her face lit up with a brilliant, joyful smile as she announced that she had finally found her own path to follow. Zeke simply watched her transformation. He responded with a terse, "Suit yourself." Gazing out over the city, Seal clutched her hands to her chest, making a silent vow. She would follow the path that he walked to. Her decision was made. Far below, the Astella ducal house stood illuminated against the night, a symbol of the life and obligation she had just chosen to leave behind. Elsewhere, in a lavish office, a man slams his fist down upon his desk in fury. He seethes over Seal, that little wretch, who managed to break the very seal he had placed upon her and awaken her divine magic. He had believed he could be rid of her without lifting a finger, But now he realizes this entire fiasco has only served to prove her latent talent. His fist trembles with frustration. Lord Lagias was supposed to be an incompetent, corrupt fool. To make matters worse, the one who aided Seal, Zeke Lagias, seems to know about their role as the kingdom's intelligence agency. As he seethes, an attendant approaches to ask for his orders, noting that Zeke also appears to be acquainted with Lord Glance. The man, addressed as Lord Actal, dismisses the idea of an elaborate disguise, concluding it is more natural to assume that Zeke himself is the anomaly. He is revealed to be Actal Astella, Seal's half-brother. A new strategy forms in his mind. Perhaps, he considers, they should try to bring Zeke Lagias over to their side. 3 years have passed before the grand Lagias estate, and now 15-year-old Zeke stands in quiet contemplation, his expression unreadable. Inside, he finds his parents, Lord and Lady Lagias, in high spirits. His father laughs heartily, declaring that their current happiness is all thanks to Zeke, who quietly observes their exceptional cheerfulness. His father elaborates with a proud smile, explaining that Zeke's recent exploits have elevated the renown of House Lagias to new heights. His mother, covering a delicate laugh, adds that she couldn't possibly be happier. He closes his eyes, accepting their joy. Internally, he concedes that he cannot blame them for celebrating. His thoughts drift back to the original game scenario, where the character of Zeke Lagias had absolutely zero hope of ever improving his villainous reputation. He reflects that all his efforts, all his achievements, are merely a means to a single, predetermined end, the one where he dies. To that end, over the past 3 years, he trained relentlessly to grow stronger, even becoming an adventurer to follow the path laid out for him. His journey even led him to save the city of Apen, a significant event along his fated path. Yet things have changed. In the city streets, citizens now speak of him differently. One recalls how Zeke was accused of stabbing Lady Seal and summoning a demon, noting that normally his actions would be twisted into villainy, but this time was different. Elsewhere, Seal Astella herself considers the outcome. She acknowledges that thanks to her vouching for him, Zeke's public image has unexpectedly improved. She is left to wonder, however, what kind of ripple effect this unforeseen development will have on the future. She reflected with concern on the growing number of scenarios unfolding outside of her game knowledge. Her actions had diverged so far from the original story that she had even ended up saving 2 of the protagonist's companions. Her thoughts drifted to other anomalies she had encountered: a demon sword she had never seen in the game, and the unsettling ability known as the Netherworld Eyes, which could foresee death. Furthermore, she was aware of a mysterious organization operating from the shadows of Apen, another element entirely absent from her predictions. With all these changes, she worried that from this point on, events might not go as scripted. Her contemplation was interrupted by a maid standing before a set of large doors, announcing the arrival of Lord Zeke. Inside the room, his father, Lord Lagias, turned to him with a serious expression and informed him that they had guests. Zeke's eyes widened in surprise as he looked toward the entrance hall. He recognized the armored footwear of the visitors, realizing it had been a long time. He immediately wondered if their presence was connected to Seal. Indeed, the guests were Knight Mia of the Glance survey team and the mage, Marks, who stood beside her with their luggage. Mia smiled confidently at Zeke, stating frankly that they had witnessed the capabilities of House Lagias and were there with a request specifically for him. She explained that every few years, the lords from all regions gather in the royal capital for the Council of Lords. Their formal request was for Lord Zeke to serve as security for this important event. Before Zeke could respond, his father's voice boomed with indignation. He acknowledged that House Lagias would, of course, be in attendance at the council, but declared that he would absolutely not allow his precious heir to be exposed to such danger. He stammers, taken aback as magician Marks laments the missed opportunity. With a cheerful smile, she notes what a pity it is, as protecting the royal capital is a prestigious honor that would have been a perfect chance for the Lagia's name to soar even higher. He feels a bead of sweat as he considers her words. The recommendation came directly from Sage Glance himself, making it the talk of the town. It would have been a chance for the world to witness Lord Zeke's brilliance. The pressure mounts as Knight Mia chimes in, adding that it's a shame they must be refused. Lord Lagias grunts, visibly distressed by their combined disappointment. His resolve instantly shatters. He spins around, his expression completely changed, and vehemently declares that Zeke must protect the royal capital. Having made his sudden reversal, he promptly turns and walks away, stating that he will leave the details of the conference preparations to them. Once his father is gone, Zeke turns to Mia and Marks. He surmises that since they went out of their way to nominate him, the mission must be related to the recent incident in Apen. Mia looks at him, impressed. She concedes that his insight is as sharp as ever. She explains the gravity of the situation. The mysterious organization that placed the curse on Apen has yet to be identified, and their objectives are unknown. There's a high probability they will target the conference, an event the king himself will attend. A single mistake cannot be afforded. As he processes this, Magician Marks adds another crucial piece of information. While the recommendation from Lord Glance is genuine, this is also a direct request from the ducal house of Astella. He internally questions the involvement of Seal Astella, noting her attachment. Recalling his father's outburst, he realizes declining would have been too much trouble. He concludes that everyone involved is an imbecile before a chilling thought surfaces. If this is a request from the Astella family, could it be a trap orchestrated by Seal's half-brother? He paused, a troubling thought striking him. The enemy organization knew his face. How foolish of him to overlook such a critical detail. Before he could voice his concern, however, his companions interjected. Mia and Marx exchanged a confident smile. They had anticipated this exact problem, they assured him, telling him to simply leave it to them. His eyes widened in surprise. As he questioned their preparedness, Marx set a heavy case on the floor with a thud, announcing that they had come fully equipped. They opened the case with a flourish, revealing a dazzling array of cosmetics and tools. With cheerful determination, they declared their intention to give him a disguise. Before he could protest, their hands were on him, holding him firmly in place. He began to struggle, a cry of alarm caught in his throat. Their voices were calm and reassuring, telling him to relax and stop struggling so they could get to work. He had to wait, they insisted, spotting something that caught their attention. Elsewhere, the countryside was peaceful. A sturdy stone bridge arched over a placid river, surrounded by lush trees and overgrown grass. By the riverbank near that very bridge, the young hero Van stood alone. He drew his sword with a soft metallic whisper, his expression one of intense focus. He then leaped into the air, raising the blade high. With a sharp cry, he brought the weapon down in a powerful, cleaving arc. The impact was immense. His strike tore a deep trench through the earth, sending soil and rock flying as he stood amidst the display of raw power. The young swordsman, Van Freek, swings his blade with fierce determination, water arcing from the steel. His companion, Atri, watches from the riverbank, noting his intense focus. He turns his attention to her, calling out her name. Atri looks back at him, her expression gentle. He explains that hearing about the incident in Apen spurred him into action. The thought that such a powerful adventurer exists meant he couldn't just sit still. As they continue their journey, passing over an old stone bridge, Atri asks if he has also been working on his magic training. Van affirms that he has, but adds with conviction that he never wants to return to that particular village. He recalls his surprise when their trading company stopped in Alhai village and she suddenly appeared, asking to work for them. He smiles, complimenting her on her incredible talent for magic. Atri looks away modestly, replying that compared to a certain person, she still has a long way to go. His hand tightens on the hilt of his sword. He declares that she should just wait, as he has no intention of remaining at his current level either. With a sharp glint in his eye, he draws his sword slightly, vowing to make a name for himself as a swordsman, whatever it takes. Atri gazes up at him, her expression unreadable but filled with a quiet intensity as she takes in his declaration. With their resolve set, Atri announces that the main caravan has reached the royal capital and it's time for them to move. Van agrees enthusiastically, looking forward to the business opportunities with the Council of Lords and the promise of a grand adventure. He and his companion Atri raise their fists in shared determination, cheering their arrival at the royal capital. Their carriage rumbles towards the towering gates of their destination, the royal capital, Spirito. Inside the walls, they are greeted by the sight of a massive, bustling thoroughfare, a testament to the city's reputation for repelling countless monster invasions. Elsewhere, plans are being discussed. It is noted that due to the number of different organizations involved in an upcoming conference, all guards must first gather at the Adventurers Guild headquarters. A young man with a pauldron on his shoulder explains that the guild's status as neutral ground makes it the most convenient meeting spot for everyone. At that moment, an ornate carriage rolls to a quiet stop on a cobblestone street. The same young guard, Luke Hartmann, steps out, confirming that they have arrived at the specified location. His expression hardens as he turns to his unseen companion, warning them to stay sharp, as an enemy could be watching from anywhere. A foot in a formal, heeled shoe steps down from the carriage. A firm voice speaks, uttering a single word, Zeke, no. The voice belongs to a stern young woman in a dark, formal dress. She extends a hand, addressing the person before her not as Zeke, but as Lady Brynhilder. She dismisses the notion as ridiculous. Her guard, Luke Hartmann, can't help but marvel at her transformation, musing on how gender-swapping magic and some makeup could create such a beauty. Still, he trails off, a thought left unfinished. Before he can complete his thought, she strikes a confident pose, loudly proclaiming that the result is only natural, given the high quality of the original form she had to work with. Luke smiles, remarking to himself that despite the new appearance, her personality hasn't changed